folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania. Today's special featured guest is none other than Byron Shepard from Morning Shot. This is the guy some of you love to love and some of you seem to love to hate. Haven't quite figured that one out yet, though. But lots of comments about the newer format there on Morning Shot. Good and not so good. But one thing about it, it's definitely got people's attention. Byron, good morning. How's it going?
Hi, Chris. How you doing?
I'm all right, struggling with this Delta Airlines crippled spine of mine, courtesy of 15.5 hours of misery with its chair 2 inches from my face. But it's still been over a week now, and my back is still killing me. I'm just starting to do some exercise here. Hopefully that'll strengthen up the muscles and recover. But other than that, I'm doing okay. Better than folks in South Africa. 20 March, EFF threatens looting and violence, running around with loudspeakers in their buckies, telling people if they don't shut their businesses down, they'll be looted. Did you see that?
Now, I've seen all the shenanigans that go on with the EFF, but it's kind of like at this point in time, somebody turns around and says, EFF and violence. If you turn around and say, oh, that's never happened before, I'd be really shocked. So I think we've all seen these type of rhetoric out of them, and it's just like the EFF following their playbook. I think the better question is, in any functioning democracy, the EFF would have been classed a terrorist organization by now. So the question is, why hasn't South Africa deemed them a terrorist organization?
Well, there's a very simple answer. They're the armed wing of the ANC, just as pathetic as Mkhonto Sizwe was back in the day. They are, of course, the EFF runs at the sign of any sort of opposition. It would take three teenage, Boer Meisy to stand there and defend, and the EFF would run away. They're just cowards. We saw how they reacted at Brockenfell when water cannons were turned on them. They scattered like cockroaches in retribution. They damaged car dealerships. No, they're the armed wing of the ANC. They're convenient, and that's why they exist. When they used domestic terrorism to attack clicks locations a couple years ago, I called them out as a domestic terrorist organization, and that's exactly what they are. They threaten violence, and then they follow through with it. They used petrol bombs at one of the clicks locations. They terrorized 43 clicks locations over something that was done by a black South African and then accusing white South Africans of racism when it's a BEE-owned company. The manager who put the ad up was black. The manager who took it down, apologized, was black. And nothing to do with white South Africans, yet they play these little games. They are there and tolerated because they're a nice distraction from Pala Pala. They're a nice distraction from PPE theft. They're a nice distraction from the pervasive kleptocracy that is the angry, naughty children. That's my response.
Yeah, so I mean, there's something I'll tell Ramon. So many years ago, I worked for Cabinet Office in London, and I worked directly for the Minister of Transport, and I worked on some IT systems here in the UK. And as I always tell Ramon, if you ever look at something on page 1, if the front page newspaper is saying something really controversial, one of the things you learn in government is never look at page 1, look at page 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Because page 1 is designed to hide what's going on page 10.
Yeah.
That way they can't say, well, we didn't tell you because it's there. But at the same time, should we say the attention-grabbing headlines are there to hide the real stuff in the background. So that as I always say to Ramon, the EFF provides for a great degree of cover for the ANC. And it's funny that on the days that the EFF does its stupidest things, there's always something quiet in the background that's being released that people should be aware about, but they're too busy focusing like over here. Yeah. It's diversionary tactics, but I know, Chris, you've worked in politics and you've worked in intelligence, so you know the gig, right? So we know what we're looking at.
Exactly. It's no different than the apoplectic reaction of rhinos and Democrats all over Congress. Oh, Tucker Carlson's trying to rewrite history. No. He's simply showing us video that's been made available in the public domain because of a Freedom of Information Act request, which was delayed for 2 years illegally by the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate. Now the video is out there for the public to see, and it paints a very different story, especially about Brian Sicknick, the police officer who was not murdered that day with a fire extinguisher. He was walking around alive after he was supposedly murdered, and also about the so-called QAnon shaman there, Jacob Chesney. That guy, boy, he has been he's a political prisoner. It's as simple as that. He's a political prisoner, and my government's violations of our Constitution are just become so regular that I don't think we're even shocked anymore when they spy on us, when they illegally arrest people, they charge people, they use FBI to raid the homes of pro-lifers, when those pro-lifers are the ones assaulted in the street, and then charges are filed against them, and they're arrested by an FBI hit squad, while the murderous pro-murder thugs out there, the pro-abortion, actually beat people and don't even get arrested and allowed to turn themselves in. It's unbelievable. I don't know what happened. I was in uniform, defending freedom, making lives better for people around the world, especially in Africa. I come home and this nonsense greets me. I'm apoplectic. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes a difficult thing for individuals and the general public to kind of get their head around. I mean, you think about how many years we've seen veterans of places like Afghanistan that have lost their lives, they've lost their legs, limbs, families torn apart, divorces, kids that grew up without fathers. And the Biden administration handed back the Afghanistan in, well, what was in a decent format. And it wasn't so much that he handed the Afghanistan government back, but he handed all the American equipment with it, now making Afghanistan, I think they're somewhere in the top 5 most armed nations in the planet. So you'd never really be able to go back there to re-salvage anything there. And to a large degree, you would have to kind of look at that as a person who fought for freedom, for safety of their country and the love of their land. You think, well, what did you fight for? You know, it was a war that meant something for a while, and then it really kind of symbolized not just failure of an administration, but failure of an administration to look after its own assets, which I think is worse than just a failure of administration.
Well, to be clear on that, and this is something I share with people all the time, so it's not directed at your comment. I understand where you're coming from, but the problem with this is that the military hardware that was in Afghanistan didn't belong to the U.S. government. Our Congress, our senators and our congressmen for 20 years allocated $100 billion over the course of that time to purchase that equipment to gift to the government of Afghanistan on the presumption that we would have a relationship with that government and it would not be overturned and we wouldn't have Joe Biden running like a little schoolgirl with wet nappies away from the scene. But that's been a big point of contention with conservatives here in America, and I have to correct them all the time. It wasn't our equipment. Our government foolishly purchased it on behalf or for the government of Afghanistan. And so when we abandoned that equipment, it wasn't our equipment to take back. Now, that's maybe quibbling, but it is an important point from a standpoint that the real issue here is that Joe Biden lied. He lied to the American public. First, he said the reason we have to leave Afghanistan is because America's tired of this war. Well, we weren't in the war. It had been 18 months since U.S. combat troops had been engaged in combat in Afghanistan. We had 5,000 soldiers there. They were a security training force, Security Force Assistance, FFA, a project I've done repeatedly throughout Africa, training host nation military. We did have a combat arms unit there, some special forces and rangers who were on the ground, but they were a quick reaction force in case American personnel were ever in any danger. They weren't there to engage in combat, only there for defensive purposes. And Joe Biden lied, and people died. There was no reason for us to abandon Afghanistan in the fashion that we did. That's the real story here. That's the issue. That is the impeachable offense that should be pursued. But of course, this demonic lunatic will never be impeached. It's really, really, really sad what's happened all around the world. I mean, look, Byron, you just look at what happened. The day that he became president on 21st of January, 2021, 9 days later, Myanmar's military overthrows a democratically elected government, a thoroughly corrupt democratically elected government, but hey, a democratically elected government. So a military junta overthrows. What does Joe Biden do or say? He can't even spell Myanmar. He has no idea where Burma's at. So he does nothing. 6 weeks after he becomes president, Vladimir Putin moves 70,000 Russian troops to the border with Ukraine. What does Joe Biden say? Nothing. What does Joe Biden do? Nothing, because he doesn't care. He isn't focused on that. Not until he needs a distraction from his low popularity numbers in December of 2021 does he bother to mention, Vladimir Putin, and then it suddenly becomes the hottest issue on the planet. $145 billion proxy war. The list goes on and on and on. Afghanistan, of Biden's epic foreign policy blunders, which have weakened America. They have weakened security in the world, and they've allowed this malaise that's happening and people suffering all over the planet. It's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, and I would agree with all of that. I mean, one of the biggest conundrums, I suppose, of the U.S. population at this point in time should be the question of how you dealt with Donald Trump, because every time Donald Trump seemed to say boo, it seemed to be an impeachable offense. I mean, let's not forget that supposedly he was going to be impeached over having a telephone conversation with an individual in Ukraine. telephone.
Volodymyr
This is not to
Volodymyr Zelensky, no less.
Correct.
Their favorite patriot.
This nearly got him impeached. But now we've got situations here where the Biden administration, we have obviously Hunter's laptop, the very famous Hunter's laptop, direct links into Ukraine, the amount of money laundering that's going on there over the war effort. No one says a thing, man. Like, everybody just shrugs their shoulders and go, Biden, eh? Yeah, that guy. And that's it. Like, but that's not how we dealt with Trump, huh?
No.
Like, you look at some of the things that Trump said or did. I mean, that guy could sneeze incorrectly and all of a sudden it would be racist. You got Biden here calling people all sorts of names on a daily basis, forgetting their names. This is not even taking into account what he said historically. Let us not also forget that during the actual election, it was him versus Camilla. And during that, one of the things that Camilla highlighted as being one of the negatives for Joe Biden was apparently he was a flaming racist. Do you remember that?
Oh,
I heard him on TV, a racist.
I did videos about it. Like, I covered that live, that debate.
and now he's like, oh, great, he's great. He's all for the diversity. Like, yeah. Come on, man.
No, the guy is just a grifter. He's been a grifter for 50 plus years, suckling off the teeth of the American taxpayer, accomplishing virtually nothing. The only bill he ever put on the floor of the Senate that ever got through it in 30 plus years in the Senate was the crime bill, which the 3 strikes and you're out, which led to tens of thousands of black men being incarcerated for minimum 10-year sentence for drug offenses. Something that we're told is nonviolent, and we're evil racists because we have that law. Well, we have that law because of Joe Biden. I didn't push that law. Joe Biden did. Joe Biden did, and Bill Clinton signed it into law. 3 strikes and you're out. So you want to talk about racists, you need to look at the historical legacy of the Democratic Party. The party of Andrew Jackson, the first ever Democratic president in history of the United States, who defrauded the Cherokee, the Seminole, and the Choctaw Indians, stealing their land from them, chasing them to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, in which thousands of children and women and elderly died in the dead of winter, as this racist Andrew Jackson, first ever Democratic president of this country, stole the land, swindled the Cherokee and the Choctaw. You want to talk about racists? Let's talk about Andrew Johnson after the Civil War. Let's talk about Woodrow Wilson, the wonderful Woodrow Wilson, has a center named after him, the racist president who aired The Birth of a Nation in the White House. The first ever motion picture show in the White House is a clarion call to the KKK, to lynchings of black Americans. That was the first movie ever shown in the White House. And Woodrow Wilson, who segregated the federal workforce during the First World War. The federal workforce, black and white Americans have worked in harmony for decades since the end of slavery. And then he segregated. Let's go to the Second World War. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the king of America, the man who sent Japanese Americans, 4th generation Japanese Americans, to concentration camps, destroying their lives. And his corrupt Supreme Court said it was legal. It's not legal. And we should go on and on. The 1950s, when the Democrats filibustered with a racist in the Democratic Party in the Deep South to prevent the Eisenhower administration's Civil Rights Act from being passed in 1956 and 1957. The list goes on and on. These people are devout, hardcore bigots, racist, and they simply deflect all of their own shortcomings on those of us who have compassion for everybody else.
Yeah, I think, the Democrats are always very quick to ignore certain things. I mean, you're trying to use history and trying to explain things historically to people that conveniently don't seem to like it. I mean, if we take, for example, the 1619 Project, which is meant to say America's founded on a degree of racism. And the interesting thing about that is I think the Democrats sometimes very conveniently forget that when it was the Civil War trying to give the Emancipation Proclamation was done by Republicans. It was Republicans who wanted to free the slaves. The Democrats didn't.
No.
They seem to be very keen to
forget that.
Yep. The other thing they seem to be very keen to ignore is that arguably the first green person who actually gave a flying monkeys about the U.S. countryside and natural growth. So the first real green president was probably Teddy Roosevelt, because he came up and he signed a lot of natural parks into law and said we need to be careful with all of our conservation. He was probably the first conservationist. But they seem to be very keen to ignore those facts.
Who established? I don't like it, but the Environmental Protection Agency, established by Richard Milhouse Nixon, a Republican. Yeah, they forget that. No, their history is pretty lame, but even their contemporary history is wrong. They just can't get facts correct. They constantly lie and they manipulate. I mean, now we've seen the footage from January 6th, the 41,000 hours, little snippets of it that are being, of course, Tucker Carlson cherry-picked these clips. But is it any different than the slimy members of Congress who took the clip of the Capitol Police ushering members out of the Senate chamber, and they all rushed out of there, and all they showed was the last 3 seconds of Senator Josh Hawley running out, and they called him a coward. The problem is that when you see the entire clip, Josh Hawley is the last senator to leave that room and only goes when the police chase him out. The rest of them ran like little biatches ahead of him, and they distorted that to make it and destroy his reputation because he's effective. He's dangerous because he is the person that exposes their fraud, along with Jim Jordan and a host of other Republicans. But no, these people are just reprobates. We can turn this script and flip it over to South Africa, and we can say the same thing about what's going on there. By the way, did you see that Zandile Gumeda's trial, finally on trial after years of waiting for this corrupt reprobate to go before a judge?
Over 300 corruption charges, man. Like, it's insane.
No. 2,000 charges against the 21 co-defendants. She may have 300, but there's 2,000 charges of corruption against 21 co-defendants. By the way, the speaker system didn't work, so that delayed the trial.
Yeah, but this is like Juju, right? I mean, have you ever seen Juju's trials? I mean,
look, I mean, my friend Mark Oppenheimer grilled him, and he still got acquitted. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's I did a video on that earlier because the nurses in Kailicha are out there protesting for a 10% wage increase, but instead of chanting at the ANC, who's responsible for their wages because they're state employees, instead of doing that,
they're singing "Kill the Boer."
They're singing "Kill the Boer." I mean, so 28,000 Boer.
I don't know what
does that have to do?
Farmers got to do with your pay rise.
I mean,
maybe
look,
the farmers are paying them.
Well, they are indirectly. They're paying the taxes. The few South Africans paying taxes, and so you want to murder the very people who are providing the little bit of revenue that provides the salary you already have existing. This is just stupid.
It's the commie way, man. It's the commie way.
No, but the problem
you kill the golden goose.
But the problem here is that if you watch my video, you'll see I mentioned obese, spoiled, privileged little shits, because that's what they are. They have jobs when millions of South Africans have no job. The unemployment rate's astronomical. They have jobs. They're demanding a 10% wage increase when there's no money in the coffer. Very selfish of them. I know life is tough. We're all dealing with it. I spent $45 bringing back one sack of groceries from the store yesterday, and that stuff would have cost me less than $10 before Biden became president. In that short a time, it's gone to $45. That's a 350% increase. I don't want to hear about 6% inflation. That's a lie. It's a total lie. A quart of ice cream cost me $1.89 2.5 years ago. It's $5.89 now for the same thing. They were on sale yesterday for $4, and we're supposed to be happy about that. But these spoiled little turds, these nurses, are singing "Kill the Boer." Now, here's my issue with this, is that none of them were alive during apartheid. They don't know who Jan van Riebeeck and Hendrik Verwoerd is and separate development. They are victims of 30 years of malfeasance, maladministration, and kleptocracy. You should be screaming at the ANC, not the people who are actually paying the taxes that provide your salaries, you selfish little pricks. And here's the thing. Who raises people like this if they think it's okay to chant songs about murdering people? What kind of values and morals do people have when they think it's okay? Oh, it's just a song. It's not just a song. Let me get out there and sing this song tomorrow. Murder black people, hang black people, Well, you see how quickly that becomes a racist incident.
You're not allowed to reverse the tables.
Exactly.
Logic isn't these people's strong point.
No.
Just before we carry on, so one of the comments in your section says, I look distracted. So I just want to put this down for the audience. My camera's there.
And your computer's
there. The screen is there.
Yeah.
So I'm reading the comment sections, but my eyes have to look there.
See,
but that's the camera.
Well, actually, it's a good time. It's a good segue to shift because Byron's a businessman. He's not a very successful businessman because he can't afford 2 screens. He can't afford 2 computer screens at his palatial mansion in the UK there. So speaking of which, it looks more like South Africa than it does UK.
I have one of these big screens, the big wide ones.
Yeah, that's it. Sure, tell us that. Yeah. Did you get that at a game during the riots?
Hey, you remember the riots? Eh?
I do remember the riots. One of the few ones.
5-finger discounts.
One of the few people remember the riots of 2021, July 2021. But no, it's seriously, Byron, the reason I have you on is a number of people want to know a little bit more about you. And we don't need to get in a great deal of, personal interest about, your 16 wives, your 23 children spread across Africa and the millions you've had to spend in Ebola to pull that off. We don't have to get into that. But I mean, people do want to learn a little bit about you. They see you on Morning Shot and like, who the hell is this guy? What's this all about? And you guys have explained why you're on there. And Roman has talked to me. He said, he's got a lot going on. It was it was becoming so much he needed some help in the program. And so you've brought another dimension to Morning Shot, which I think a lot of people actually like. Some people whine about it, but we can never please everybody. So let's learn a little bit about Byron Shepherd. Okay, so if it's questions out of bounds, you don't have to answer it, okay? Fair enough? Fair enough? Okay. All right.
Yeah, if questions out of bounds, I said, no, I'm not answering that.
There you go. Okay,
I
so
plead the fifth.
So are you actually an Englishman pretending to be a South African, or are you a South African?
No, I'm a South African pretending to be an Englishman. So I was actually born in Durban.
There you go.
You know Durban.
Yeah, I've been to Durban many times.
So yeah, I mean, I was born in Durban. I was raised in Durban. I lived in Yellowwood Park until I was 16, and then one day my parents said, right, we're going to the UK. My father was from British heritage, so he was like, whoop, off we go. And off I went. I didn't really have much of a choice, to be honest. I mean, I was still a little kiddie, you know. So as much as I would have liked to have stayed, I always had this ambition. Even when I left, I said, well, I'll go to the UK for a few years. I'll get my education. I'll come back to South Africa and I can say, sort of pommies, I'll go live somewhere else. But it never really happened that way, you know, like life gets in the way and, you know, you end up kind of settling. And it's something I do try to explain to a lot of South Africans when they talk to me about the whole immigration thing, because most South Africans will say, well, sometimes they want to go abroad for a couple of years, earn some money, pay off a bond or something, and then they're like, I'll come back. And it's like,
doesn't work that way.
It don't really work that way. I know on paper it sounds like it would, but you know, when you actually commit and you've got your own bond somewhere else, and you've got rent and contractual commitments, and then you got a job, and then you meet someone, and your kids go to school, and like it don't really work that way. So, you know, I came here with good intentions, and then I ended up staying here for 20 years, and ultimately, you know, it took death and a lot of, you know, divorce and all sorts of stuff in the family for me to get to a point where I really looked at my life and I was like, you know what, I've been meaning to go back for 20 years. I'm off, but you know, it wasn't an easy step. You know, I've got brothers all over the world. My one brother's in Washington, my other brother's in Perth, and it's like I speak to them and they all like, I wish you could go home. But you know, even my eldest brother now, who's in Washington, he's like, he just says to me all the time, he just lacks the courage to make that step to go home because he's been gone for so long. So I think that's the one thing people tend to forget, that there's like a period where you can be gone for long enough that the point of return is past, and going back isn't really an option anymore, because you know, like life passes you by. So yeah, I'm a South African pretending to be a Brit, but you know, a South African who went home. So.
Well, listen, I understand where you're coming from, and I've told people this for years, because people always think the grass is greener. The grass isn't always greener, and even if it is greener, it's not the same. And so you are how you were inculcated, and where you grew up is part of who you are, whether you like it or not. But that said, once you leave, going back is not easy. And I discovered this early. I graduated from high school in 1982, and I lived in a place where I was kind of alien. I wasn't from rural Appalachia, but I spent my high school years there, ran a dairy farm, and, you know, made friends in school. But I mean, I wasn't really from that community, if you know what I mean. But I mean, I got along with people well. So when I went back there after having spent a year at university and then 3 years plus in the Army, 3.5 years in the Army. So my fifth year reunion was in 1987. I went back to my hometown in Ohio, and I didn't recognize any of these people. I mean, physically they're the same people. They didn't have gray hair, they didn't get chubby yet, but their lives were, and I don't want to say their lives were small. Everybody's life is rich, but I mean, I had been around the world. I had fought against communism. I had done all these things. I had seen so many things. My eyes had been opened up to a wider world. And you can never go back. I mean, especially when you make that break at a younger age. If you're a teenager or in your late teens or early 20s, your formative years, like a lot of people go to university abroad and then they meet somebody, they get married, they have kids, and that's where their life is. Their life isn't back in KZN. Their life isn't back in Northwest. Their life is now in Cambridge, unfortunately, or Oxford or somewhere like that. And it's difficult. But if you do it later in life, if you make that break after you've become who you are as a young man or young woman in your 20s and 30s, and say in your 40s you can go abroad for a few years, then come back, it does tend to work, I think, because then you still have that strong pull that's going to bring you back. Whereas when you're younger, it's easier for those ties to fray, and it's hard to go back. And besides, We can never go back. I mean, the best decade ever was the 80s. I mean, the music, the culture, everything was brilliant. We'll never recover the 80s.
You and me talking the same language now, Buster.
Yeah, that's right.
Ramon and me, we don't agree on this. But
well, Ramon is wrong. He's wrong all the time.
I'm a massive fan of 80s music and all that kind of stuff. Like that's my era.
I mean, it was incredible. Go ahead.
Just to address two comments quickly before they move too far up to the section. So one person says, the South Africa we knew is no longer there. But this is what people don't understand, that the Britain that I knew when I got here in 1998
it's gone. It's gone.
Okay, so you everybody needs to have an understanding. The world's move on. And it doesn't matter what country you go to. If what you're doing is you're trying to go there and look for, should we say, stability and nothing changes, it doesn't exist. The US doesn't exist in the same way it does anymore.
Good Lord, no. It's not even the same country it was 10 years ago.
100%. So the second comment is one from Erica. Hi, Erica. I know you stalk us a lot on Morning Shot, so we're very happy to see you here. It says, Byron, I'm in Mams and Toti. Don't come back. Guess has changed. So I went to Kingsway High School. So I was in that neck of the neighborhoods. But obviously now I live in Quebec or Port Elizabeth, as they want to, proper people call it. And, I'm very happy in Port Elizabeth. It's a great place to live. I have a massive place. I've got a big ranch outside of there, and it's great. But I do go back to Durban every so often. I've still got family in Durban, being from that area, and I do go back there probably 2 or 3 times a year. And I would agree the place is a little bit hard sore to see. It's a bit like that scene from Rambo where like he goes back to the house he used to live in, and then he sees like this massive like overpass has been built where his house was, and it's now like been paved over, and he's like, he feels really lost and out of touch. Like that's the feeling you get. You walk there and you're like, oh, this doesn't feel the same. I've been away for too long. But I'll say that now that I've been back in South Africa for 5 years now, when I come back to the UK, I have that exact same experience. Like I was here for 20 years, I go back to places I used to know, and it's like completely different. And I'm like, well, what happened? Yeah. So and I suppose one of the experiences of having lived in both countries and had lives in both countries, you do start to realize the fact that both countries are changing. They're not necessarily for the best in both places. Life does move on regardless of what country you look in. And if you're looking for that stable place that just gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling, it's in your head. No other place, it's just in your head. And once you get over that, then you realize like you can kind of live anywhere and make your life there. It's down to mindset and not a lot else.
No, fair point. 2 things to bring up very quickly. Number one, folks, listen, if you don't watch Morning Shot, I strongly encourage you to go watch Morning Shot, if nothing else, out of empathy for Byron, who seems to think of Port Elizabeth is a nice place to live. I've been there. I'm really not sure what's wrong with him. We can recommend mental health professionals. I know a couple in PE. Ronaldo visits one regularly. That's the only reason we keep him sane. Just to let you know there. But seriously, having lived in over a dozen countries, approaching, I think, 15 or 16 countries around the world, yeah, I can certainly attest that you just can't go back. I mean, you can go back, but you can't recapture that zeitgeist, that feeling, that spirit. And I miss the 80s, man. I miss I was poor. I had no money. I was struggling, but I was becoming who I was. And the music just rocked, from Flock of Seagulls to The Clash to even Olivia Newton-John, as we used to call her, Olivia Neutron Bomb. It was awesome, and it was everything. Members only jackets, and big collars, and it was even mullets, which I hated. It was a time. It was a special time. We destroyed communism, and then the world lost its way, and here we are now, decades later, and I'm just shaking my head, going, "What's next?"
Yeah, so one person has commented in the section. Hi, Stephanie. He said, "Are you safe, Byron, in Port Elizabeth?" Extremely. I've never had any problems there. So actually, where I live in the United Kingdom, I still have my house here, my car's here, usual stuff. I'm actually here at the moment. It's snowing, so I'm fucking cold. But I've had more crime occur to me in the United Kingdom than I have in South Africa. Yeah. Now, when I sell that to people, they go, "Yeah, but that's just like off fluke, and it doesn't happen to everybody." And it's like, it's still safer then. You're like, well, it's funny. It's funny how you want to excuse crime when it's like in your country, but when it's in South Africa, it's like you're not prepared to excuse it. It's kind of like, you think South Africa is the only country in the world with crime, and like,
Yeah.
they ain't
And
tough.
as far as that,
So-
if you think there's no crime, you obviously don't live in Leicester or Luton.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you. You know, that's a great example. And you know, one of the things that I do say to individuals quite a lot is, one of the problems in modern South Africa is that people appear to be unaware of certain things. And one of the things that I really like about American culture is this idea of like prepper culture. You'd rather have something and not need it than need something and not have it, right? And in South Africa, we don't seem to have that mindset. We like, no, we just get what we need, and if we don't do something, like, who cares, okay? So it's like, how many people I come across and they'll say to me, I feel really unsafe, and I'll say something very simple, like, do you have a gun? And they go, oh, no, I don't need a gun. You're like, okay, well, I carry a gun with me every single day. Have I ever had to use it? No. Am I ever going to have to use it? Hopefully not. So why do I do it? Well, I carry a gun with me every day because if I ever have to have it, I have it. Like, that's as simple as what it is. I also carry with me every day a med pouch and you know, some tourniquets. And they go, well, why would you have that? That's crazy. Well, what if I ever get shot and I need a chest seal or something? I don't know. Something could happen. Maybe I shoot someone else and I need a chest seal. Don't know. Have I ever had to use it? No. Will I ever have to use it? Maybe, maybe not. But I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. The same thing then occurs to like security. You say to your house on the house, do you have armed response? No. You're like, okay, why not? You know, it's a bit expensive. You know, it's like, but I don't really need it. I've never had any problem living here. It's like, yeah, but you only need once, huh? And it's only once. So put something in place to protect yourself against it. Like, you know, rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Like, you guys have that mindset in the US, but in South Africa, for whatever reason, people need it, but just don't have it. And you always ask them why, and like, there's never any logical answer. Now, I want to contrast that in terms of the UK, where quite often you may need this stuff, but you can't have it. So a really good example is the crime rates now in the UK have got quite extreme. And as a result, like, I'm pretty sure most people here would like to carry pepper sprays, a taser, maybe even a gun.
Not legal. Not
You're
legal.
not allowed it. You're not allowed it. So these are instances where you might need it and you might want it, but you can't have it, right? At least for me in South Africa, people will say, well, how do you feel safe there? Like, it's always tense. Like, I feel safer in South Africa than I do in the UK, because when I see people doing stupid things in the UK, I know there's nothing I can do about it. I can't threaten them. I can't tell them to go away. I can't pull a firearm. I can't do any of that stuff because I'm not allowed to. I'm actually physically not allowed to. So the only thing I can do is either like turn away, look the other way, and try avoid become a victim of crime. I don't have that response in South Africa because I always know I'm armed. I know I'm always able to do something. Does that mean I'm going to walk around like a cowboy? No. You know, obviously I'm sensible. I'm trained. I have my firearm. I have all my extra preventative things in place. But I can't be preventative in the UK. I'm prohibited from doing so by law. So for me, there's always this, like I said, this weirdness. And we talk about that quite a bit on Morning Shot. It's kind of like, there's a lot of individuals that will moan. They'll go, well, you know, electricity, we don't have enough electricity. It turns off all the time. You go, okay, we'll get solar for your house. Yeah, but you know, it's expensive, and why should I? Like, the government should provide it.
The government
like,
should provide.
You know, there's companies now that will actually put a solar unit on your house, and you'll pay them a cost every month. And you look at the repayment costs on some of these systems, and we've done them even for Morning Shot. And you look at them and they're charging in some instances like 500, 600 Rand a month on repayments. And then you look at your Eskom bill and you're like, well, that's probably maybe 1,000 or 2,000. You're like, don't you see? This is actually almost a cheaper option for you to go solar and go with one of these companies. But what that would require is a degree of like proactivity. Like, let's go actually research what's there and let's go do it. And you find this a lot in South Africa. People don't want to spend the time to do it. They'd much rather go, it's unsafe, the government can't provide stuff, the whole place is going shit, the whole place is rude. And it doesn't just extend that far. I mean, it's like, I remember when I first got back to South Africa, somebody came to me and said, you know, I was here in Johannesburg, and there was this big shootout. There was these guys, and they were shooting, there were bullets flying everywhere, and 2 people died. And I was like, well, how do you know that? Like, how do you actually know? And they're like, well, I heard from my auntie's uncle,
who told me. Yeah, she heard about it from her cousins, his brothers. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, And I'm like, nah, screw this. Okay, like go there and research and then come back to me. Then they researched and they came back to me like half an hour later and they were like, oh, actually, I was wrong. It actually occurred in like Chatsworth and Durban. You're like, mate, do you have any idea how different it is and how much the narrative now shifts? Like if you told me there was a shootout in Chatsworth, I'd be like, oh,
okay, that's Tuesday, every another Tuesday. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so you look at it from that perspective and you go, why is it that you did not bother to spend the time even bothering to do the research? And this thing comes to the final point is actually when it comes to our politics, which is how I got into Morning Shop, because people can't be bothered to even do the hard work on the politics. They'll hear these weird things about, maybe ANC policy and how maybe it's anti this or anti that or whatever. But they can't be bothered to do the hard work, like to actually go out there and figure out what's going on. And one of the things you find when you actually are in the know about politics in South Africa is that you find things to be, one, very predictable, and two, very dumb. Like politics in South Africa is not smart. I worked in politics in the UK for 4 years at a very high level, cabinet office. It was smart. People were always very strategic. Everything was always done for a certain reason. There was a lot of underlying issues. In South Africa, it's just dumb. There's nothing there. Like everybody has this idea that it's like, it's the World Economic Forum pushing something. And
they're just making something up as they go. That's what it is.
100%. And when you actually realize that, then I don't know if you get a degree of comfort or
greater fear,
or maybe a greater fear. And Ramon and I had this, and I remember Ramon and I were sitting there in a taxi on the way back from Parliament. We had spent the day with John, and I was really
John Steenhuisen, guys, the gentleman whom I can't seem to get on the program for whatever reason, but anyway.
100%. So Ramon, I was really quite quiet, and then Ramon was like, "Why are you so quiet?" And I was like, I really can't figure this out. Do I feel happy that South Africa is like rudderless, or am I disappointed? Because what I really got the sense of is just like some bloke down the pub who got a little bit pissed, who happened to found himself as like leader of the opposition. There's no real smartness here. It's just like there's lots of games of fluke, and it's a lot of like guys just trying to do their best, and you're like, I don't know how you feel about that. But when you see some of the politics going on in Western society and the way that some of that is being driven by certain agendas, then you realize something. Like in South Africa, you're on your own, and that can bring a large degree of, should we say, depression to people. But for me, it didn't. For me, actually, it gave me a degree of like aspiration, because it gave me the idea that I could go there and set my life up in South Africa, and nobody was able to interfere with the life. Not because they didn't want to, but they were just incapable. They were just too useless to do it. And, I think people lose sight of that quite a lot in South Africa.
Well, we just had a host of super chats with a given exchange rate of 7,000 Rand to the dollar. I think I've earned about 33 cents here in the last 3 minutes. Thank you all for that. Rolf Corver, Erica, and I think, Rolf did 2 of them. Rolf said only 14 Rand allowed. I think you're joking, brother. It must be something wrong with your credit history. You got 50 in that second round there. But listen, it's a couple people are saying that they disagree with you. They all know family members of victims of crime. Yeah, I don't think that's the point that Byron's making, though. I think the point that Byron's making is that he feels safer because he feels he has the ability to respond if someone comes after him. Not that South Africa isn't a violent place. I think that's what he's trying to say. So I don't want people to infer incorrectly. Absolutely. There. Yeah. So there you go.
Absolutely.
So, don't infer incorrectly.
But
so also people.
I'm glad somebody said that, though, because this is also one of the things you find with South Africa. It's like whenever you say these comments, if it slightly challenges somebody's preconceived notion,
boom, they come out and defend. Come.
Absolutely. And it's always this whataboutism, the old argument, what about it? It's like, I know some guy and he had like some crime. You're like, I didn't say there wasn't crime, man. Like, I actually went out of the way. I've said, that's why I've got stuff. Like, I know very well that there's crime. I know very well what's going on. But at the same time, I also can't take away from my own lived experience, which is in the UK, I've had a significant amount of crime occur to me too. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to be blinkered to one set of crime and go, okay, UK crime's okay, but South African crime's not. Like I'm going to say crime is crime, and it happens on both sides of the pond. That's the point.
All right, so a quick note here because people are talking about in the chat here. The scientist says you get Ronaldo to help you get John Steenhuisen. Okay, I have written over the past 3 years a dozen times to the moat dragons who surround John Steenhuisen, the DA, and they've blown me off every time. Even my channel is blowing up, and I had hundreds of thousands of views, and DA's channel had like 3,000 views for their videos on YouTube. They blew me off. They don't let me talk to the guy. I, through Ronaldo's good graces, was in touch with the public affairs person who is close to Steenhuisen when they did their political stunt marching in the Thule House, which I didn't call that day a political stunt, so they had no reason to say not turn me on. And I was promised John Steenhuisen at 1 o'clock after the event. He went on the media in South Africa and didn't come on my channel. I have no problem with him going to the media in South Africa. They have a bigger reach than me. That's not a problem. But I do have a problem with being lied to and being misrepresented. And so that happened. I never had a beef with John Steenhuisen, but I'm developing one. As far as that, Helen Zilla, on her own, in a private conversation about Cape Independence in the session that I was involved in, a private session a couple years ago, was in the session. I didn't know she was there. She came on the program when I said, oh, so Helen Zilla's going to be in here. I didn't know that. That's interesting. I've been trying to reach her for about a year so I can interview her. Fascinating person. And she pops up on camera and says, because she was listening, Chris, I know who you are. I'll happily come on your program anytime. It's been 2 years. And we've seen Ronaldo and several other people I know in the DA try to get her to come on my program. I don't know what her beef is, or maybe they're just ignoring me. But I have been very generous to the DA. I've also been honest about the DA. So, I mean, what are they afraid of? But back to this point that you said there, Byron, politics is amateur in South Africa. I mean, I don't know. For a year, I'm telling these parties to get off their bum, get out and campaign in the hostels, in the mining camps, in the leafy suburbs, in the townships. And all I get is, well, I can't go to township. It's not safe. Well, are only people that look like you part of your party? That might be one of your problems. You need to recruit people. I'm going to say, Koketso Retsani is a conservative Christian. He would follow the standard of a party that has values like that. Dumo Denga, same sort of thing. And we've got the Jewish Zulu down in KZN there, Big Daddy Liberty. He's a conservative. There are millions of conservative black South Africans. It's the inherent nature of South Africans to be conservative, to be people of faith, to be people who believe in which, but there's people that just don't want to listen. And these political parties are like that. They do not listen. I have talked to the leaders of 7 different political parties in South Africa, and only one of them gives me any hope whatsoever that they're willing to take these actions. And that party, shockingly for some people, is the Freedom Front Plus. That party under Dr. Peter Groenewald has listened to people saying you should do something different. They haven't always been successful, but they made an effort. Other parties, they do the same thing. They wait till 90 days before an election. They come out with T-shirts. They come out with posters. Come vote for us. And then we never hear from them again. The only person DA we ever hear from is John Steenhuisen and Ronaldo. And that's because Ronaldo has a broadcast. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know from the DA. They go silent, silent, silent. Where is Mpo Palazzi talking to the press today after she's been ousted? Nowhere. There are a lot of brilliant politicians. I've interviewed Chris Pappas in Howick twice. He's excellent.
Yeah, he's great.
He's doing a great job in Howick. He is known in Howick. He gets out on the street. People see him. He opens up his meetings to the public. That's what these people need to do. But these parties are amateur in South Africa. It's seriously amateur hour. And you having worked in cabinet, you know what I'm talking about. This is not how you do politics. This is what you do running for class president in high school. That's what you do.
Yeah, I mean, look, I remember actually upsetting John once. And I said to him, the DA is like a football team. You have to say, okay, you know how you in football teams you get Premiership, Championship, Division 1, Division 2, Division 3. And like Division 3 is really like the amateur guys. Like they're really rubbish, right? I said the DA is like top of Division 3 and the ANC is like the bottom of Division 3. And you could say, yeah, but we're the best. We're the best out there. And you know what? You probably are. But you're still Division 3. Like, let's not overlook the fact you're still Division 3. You're not Premiership. Like the UK government might be like Premiership or Championship or something, but you're nowhere near that. You're still Division 3. They don't like saying that. But I mean, if you look at terms of messaging and proactivity in terms of an actual campaign to go out there and say policies, the entire thing is just rubbish. But you say to them, why don't you do more about this? And they're like, the DA wants to keep everything internal. They want to control that messaging. They're very scared of that messaging pushed out in a negative way. And as a result, they only kind of go on to, as an example, they'll only go on to shows they feel are safe. They'll go on to our show because they know we'll follow the rules, because we want them back. They'll go on to Joe Emilio's show because he'll follow the rules because he wants them back. So I think maybe for you're an unknown quantity, and maybe they feel that you'll take them to task and not allow them to get away with certain things because you want to hold them accountable as opposed to having them back. And maybe that's one of the difficulties. But a lot of that lies in just a weak position from them.
Exactly.
They don't like their narrative being challenged in a certain way, because that means that the politician, whoever they are, has to think outside of the box in terms of the answer, and in thinking out the box might say something that's slightly contrary to the official line.
Sure.
And because there's that nervousness there, their approach isn't to train people better to respond to these things. It's actually to do the reverse, and that is to withdraw them from those frontline activities and concentrate on what they consider to be like branch level type stuff. Like they'll go to the small communities and they'll talk to those communities and they'll do stuff like that. But what they fail to understand is that might work great for the small branch in the Western Cape, but it's not how you win a national election.
Exactly. Listen, I won't argue one iota with your assessment. I agree with it. But on the flip side of that, I challenge anybody to tell me any guest of the almost 3,000 people I've interviewed in the past few years, any guest that I've ever treated unfairly or I've done a gotcha moment to. And I wouldn't do that to them. I didn't do that to Neil De Beer. But I told Neil De Beer ahead of time, I said, people may ask a hard question. I'm going to ask it. And I asked them a hard question. Neil De Beer, a lot of South Africans hate you because you betrayed the government and you spied for MK when you were in the police service. And a lot of other South Africans hate you because you betrayed the ANC and now you're attacking the ANC. So who is the real Neil De Beer? Are you a patriot or are you someone that just turns on everybody? That's a hard question, but he knew it was coming and he was willing to answer it. Now, he gave a political answer, but that's his prerogative, and that's it. But remember when you and Roman came on and we talked, no, I'm sorry, not you and Roman, it wasn't you, it was Gideon, and Roman came on in response to the DRSA nonsense. A lot of people castigated me. These people were sycophants for Rob Hutchison, castigating me because I didn't ask hard questions. But I did ask hard questions. But none of it was a gotcha. None of it was meant to embarrass them. There were legitimate questions and they were fair. And I would do the same with the DA. I've had DA on my program. Rafua Ncheka is a brilliant woman. And I've had her on the program. I've had Chris Pappas on the program. I've had, Francois Rogers and a couple MPs. But for some reason, the people holding the chalice, the holy grail around John Steenhuisen are afraid to let people up there speak. And I don't know what their problem is. I think a lot of what you said is part of it. They don't have the right focus. But again, it's back to amateur hour. These people don't seem to be serious about winning politics. The only time I've ever seen the DA serious about what they're doing is when Helen Zille led that party. She took a party that Tony Leon kind of cobbled, took the old liberal tradition and made it go somewhere. And she turned it into the most dynamic opposition party in the world briefly. And she was the most amazing mayor of Cape Town. It was an amazing period of time for politics in South Africa. But that's all gone now. The parties in South Africa are largely a joke. They're a joke. And that's why 31% of the eligible voters bother to rock up the vote. Because they just, and even ANC voters had enough of the ANC life. Oh, look what they did. All our stores are looted. I don't have a job. There's no electricity. These people, I'm not voting for them. And they stayed home. And as a consequence, the Inkatha Freedom Party, with just 2% more vote, all in KZN, not in Gauteng, not in Northwest, 2% more vote, went from 8 to 16 municipalities they control now. Because people didn't show up. And that's the bottom line. People are apathetic. They really are.
But the other day when we were talking about the reshuffle, this is exactly what I was saying to you would happen, right? I mean, it's as I say, now how did I know that? You could say, foregone. It's like, no, politics in South Africa is just really dumb. So it's like really predictable what's going to happen. And the reality is people aren't going to vote for another party. They're just going to stay away.
Exactly.
So the ANC is not going to get the votes they traditionally had. The DA and the IFP will continue to get the votes they had. But what that will mean is that they'll win by default, because they were the only one basically being voted for. It's not because they suddenly had a huge increase in support. And that for me is like also one of the things that I find really surprising, is that none of the political parties are really vying for an increase in support. They're just vying for kind of like their little slice of the pie somewhere. And how you really notice that is, like, I noticed this the other day. I did an interview with one of the guys from HCDP. And I asked him, like, what do you think about the possibility of an EFF, ANC coalition come 2024? And he parroted a line to me that I kind of sat and I listened to, and I was like, okay. But he basically said, well, there's two sides of the ANC. There's the good side and then there's the bad side, and hopefully the good side will win and they'll split away from the ANC. And you're like, there is no good side, bad side.
No.
They all extreme it's just over who's fighting for the cookie jar. That's the only real fight that's really occurring. And it's kind of like, I was saying to Ramon afterwards, like, how is it that we know more about the politics by looking inside than the very people who's actually involved in it? It's kind of like, who should know the most about your relationship between you and your wife? Well, it should be you, because you sit down and talk to each other.
But if your mother-in-law knows more about your relationship than you do, there's a problem.
There's a problem, right? And that's exactly what I was saying to him. You know, it's like, it's just really weird, man. Like, how is it all these political parties are just so oblivious? And then you think to yourself, well, actually, there's a good answer for that, and that is because they're not really interested in the electoral system. They're just interested in their little slice of the pie somewhere, you know, and that's all they're interested in.
No, that explains 100%, you know, and it just shows you just, you know, when the DA announced the march on Lutuli House, I said, I do hope, because the details weren't out initially, I said, I do hope that they're sponsoring it and inviting the UDM, inviting COSATU, inviting, you know, the IFP, everybody to be part of it to show South Africa's anger, and they can sponsor and take some credit. But no, it was a political stunt. It was the DA. That's it. All you saw were blue T-shirts. So all we see is from people who are not inclined to trust the DA or believe them, the DA is just angry at the ANC and complaining. And that's how it came across. It's unfortunate. But there's two things I need to address in the chat here very quickly. Val Cooper's oldest sister-in-law celebrates her 100th birthday today. Imagine how much change she has seen in South Africa in 100 years. Yeah, 1923 to 2023. I mean, you know, 1923 it was a very different continent. You had the Belgian Congo was just coming to an end. You had Rhodesia. You had Nyasaland. You had the Gold Coast. You had the it's just unbelievable. All Dahomey was a country back then. All the changes that have happened around the continent. German Southwest Africa by then was now a protectorate under the League of Nations. Crazy stuff. So congratulations to your sister-in-law who's 100 today. Wow, that's impressive. I hope to be 157 before I leave this earth. I don't think I'm going to make it, but I'll give it a shot. And Lazon, now this Byron says it all, and I think this is a fair point, and I was just being modest not mentioning this, but I interviewed President Kama last week on the 28th before I left South Africa, and I posted that video before I left. And Lazon, who lives in Botswana, says, she's from PE, she said, you were very respectful with Ian Kama the other day when he made his comments about January 6th insurrection and Donald Trump. Yes, he said some very uncomplimentary and incorrect things about January 6th from his worldview. I didn't contradict him. I didn't try to get into an argument with him. That's his view. That wasn't the purpose of my interview. I allowed him to say it. And that's how I treat my guests. By the way, Ian Kama will be my guest again tomorrow on this program, folks. Former President Ian Kama of Botswana will be on the program talking about the decimation of Botswana's rhino population. He's a world-renowned conservationist. We touched on it briefly during the interview, but tomorrow we're going to talk about it because Botswana's rhino population is half what it was when he left the presidency in 2018 under this current regime. It's a disaster. Poaching and disease have wiped them out. Anyway, so I think that Lazon's comment is very fair about how I treat my guest. I mean, I could easily have gotten into a dispute with Ian Kama, but there's no value to that. I'm not here for shock value. I'm here for people to think critically and to learn about what's going on in the world. So, I mean, thank you, Lazon, for that comment. I appreciate that. And also, one more thing, Byron, before I hand it back to you in a second here. I did put a poll up just to see, you know, why people are here, because we got a good audience today. And I asked the question, are you here just to see Byron? Now, 29% said yes, they're here just to see you. So 71% said no, they're here to see me. But those numbers don't add up to the number of people actually here, because on an average, we're getting about 75 viewers per stream. So somebody's telling fairy tales, but I appreciate the warm compliments. And I should say that if 29% of you are here just for Byron, you're not doing a good job of becoming subscribers. I only added 6 subscribers during the stream. So the 29% of you, which would add up to about 35 people, unless you're already a subscriber of my channel and you came just to see Byron because he's here, you should be subscribing to my channel and helping me get to 10,000. We are now down to just 60 from 10,000, a place that I reached in just 3 months. This has taken 23 months now. Big difference with the shadow banning. Anyway, so let's see. Let me read this and I'll let you get in here. I found Ian Kama's view of the world very slanted. His opinion doesn't seem to like South Africa, especially the old regime. Yeah, Charles, I don't think he liked the old South Africa. Also, you know, I gave him a chance to correct my view about Botswana never being colonized, and he disagreed with me, and that's fine. We have different views on that. But anyway, all right, Byron, energy back to you.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that you actually talk about that shock value, because we had that last year when we went to go visit the Russian embassy about the Russian-Ukraine war.
I thought you were going to get censored and blocked on YouTube for having that interview. I was surprised.
So did we, to be honest, and we did all right. But you know what? We had a lot of people go, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Why weren't you just being like really aggressive with them? And you're like, I'm in their house and I want them to invite me back.
Exactly.
And I'm going to ask all the questions, but I'm going to give it to him to talk. The point that seems to happen now in a lot of Western media, and it's funny because if you watch interviews from like the 1950s or the 1960s, you don't see this happen. It's a relatively new thing. And I would call it like the Piers Morgan effect. You know, you got to have that, as you say, that aha moment. Like if you don't have that, then it's not a good interview, right? But it never used to be like that. It used to be of, I tell you what, I'm going to get this guy to talk. He's going to talk. You're going to have an opportunity to see what his viewpoint is. If you don't agree with it, fantastic, great. But it seems now like what everybody wants you to do is to get that gotcha moment so that they can walk away and they can be like, okay,
I won.
I won. But that's not how debates work. You're meant to change the hearts and minds of people through debate. So you're meant to give them an opportunity to say their side of things and just be respectful, let them talk, and then you can prompt them. You can be like, what about this? What about that? And it's like, you know, at the end of the day, it's a good way to allow them to articulate a viewpoint that you might not necessarily have had. And a good example of that is the Russian-Ukraine war. You may have only heard the Ukrainian side. You may not have heard the Russian side. I'm not asking you to buy it. I'm not asking you to believe it. But what I am saying is be respectful enough to listen to what he has to say. And you don't interrupt them every 3 seconds by going, yeah, but you're lying. You're lying. Yeah, you're lying. Like, that's not how debate should occur. That's not even journalism. That's just like human dignity and respect of others. But you watch people, like I said, like Piers Morgan, and everything's an argument. Like, I'm going to say something to you like, there's only 2 genders. And it's like, well, let me stop you right there. Some people say this, and that. You get halfway between answering it, and it's like, oh, well, I'm going to stop you again. And people think that's an interview. That's not an interview. That's an argument.
Exactly.
And I didn't log on to watch an argument. I logged on to hear his viewpoint. But you don't get that now. And
well, you get that on my program, and as I've told people, that's why it's called the Indaba Conversation with Chris, because it's a conversation. It's less an interview. And I hearken back to the days you're talking about, David Frost. When I was a young kid, David Frost would do these big interviews with major political figures around the world, and he would sit across from them and have a conversation with them and get their viewpoints and bring it out. He was not trying to destroy them or got you, and he left it for the viewer to decide. And that's how I tell people. You know, I have my own bias, and I'm very clear about my bias, and I tell people when I'm being biased, and I have my own worldviews. And when I share them, I tell people. When I do my news program, and I dissect the propaganda from News 24 and from Mail and Guardian, from the Washington Post, from the New York Times, from Fox News, from all of them who spread propaganda, and I tear it apart. You see my view and my bias, and I'm honest about it. There's nothing wrong with being biased. We all have bias as long as we're cognizant of it and we realize if it's clouding our judgment. My bias doesn't cloud my judgment. Communists are failures. It never works. I'm right. They're wrong. End of discussion.
Absolutely. So one person, just very quickly to address a couple of comments. So James Bowie says, what does Byron think of the PA and Gates and McKenzie? What I'm going to say is watch tomorrow's video, because we actually address that topic tomorrow on Morning Shot. So
interesting.
There you go. That's done.
And Vutsarko hasn't,
because we just recorded that today.
Vutsarko hasn't been here in donkey years. Is back. Good to see you again, Vutsarko. I have seen your other programs, and I see you back. He says, invite Herman Mashaba back. Well, I've been promised Herman Mashaba half a dozen times and have never gotten him. Never gotten him. I've been promised.
I got him.
Yeah, I know. Well, I've been promised him. I've been promised him by his nephew.
Just don't. Yeah. Just don't.
Don't get him?
Don't. Like, I tell you what, I've done a lot of interviews and stuff, and I've talked to a lot of politicians, and we got that guy onto the show, and I really want to like Herman. I really want to like Herman Mashaba, but I got halfway through the interview, and I'll be honest with you and say I got bored of my own interview. I started playing with my phone while he couldn't see. I just got so bored it just didn't make sense. And it's like, at the end of the day, we actually did a reaction video to our own interview, and I'd re-highlight the same thing, and that is Herman Mashaba has one policy, which I believe he's already failed at, and that is to get the ANC out of power.
Yeah.
He tells you that. My only policy is to get the ANC out of power by any opportunity. And you're like, Herman, you failed because you've already handed them back power many times in many places. But with that being said, ask him anything else. There's no answers, man. It's just like, I don't know, it's just gobbledygook of just time waster, and there's things being said, but they don't mean anything. So yeah,
well, I have to say that I've rarely found myself in this circumstance. I've had the good fortune to either get the right people or ask the right questions, or just it's the right time. But I've yet to come across it. Now I've watched other programs, and I'm sitting there going, okay, let me look at my TikTok and see what's going on in TikTok, because it's boring. But I've been very fortunate. But maybe that's because I've cast a pretty wide net. I mean, mine is not just politics. It's I interview people in agriculture, musicians, artists, just everyday people. I remember one of my early interviews back in 2020 is when the lockdown was first begun to be eased in South Africa. I think it was June of 2020. And I interviewed Reese Vanderveld because she owned a hair salon, and it was shut down because of the nonsense. And so I wanted to know what small business owners were experiencing. How did they survive, paying their rents and their salaries and such. And I had Reese on, and I think that was an epic interview. I think it was fascinating. Most people they didn't understand why I would invite her on, but she's a small business owner, and she was on the front lines of dealing with the ANC's criminal, illegal, unconstitutional lockdown, which destroyed the lives of millions of South Africans. She survived because the property owner had some resources. They could afford not to be paid rent, and was lenient with the businesses that rented space there. And her customers were desperate to get back but a lot of them were suffering and didn't have jobs after that. So it did take a hit on her. But I mean, look, I'll interview anybody that's not a racist and not in the EFF, as long as I think they might be interesting to my audience. And that's why you're here today. I mean, I had several requests when I was in South Africa. Hey, can you get Byron on it? We want to learn more about that guy. And a couple people said they're discovering more about you, and they find this interesting. But I was asked a question earlier about what you do, and business-wise, because you're in business. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not. What sort of business you do? You import, export. You sell illegal cigarettes from Zimbabwe. I mean, what exactly do you do?
Oh God, I should really get into the illegal cigarettes.
No kidding. There's a lot of money. It's quite lucrative.
I believe there's a load of money. I just don't want to get shot. So
that's why you hire the mules to do it for you.
So I own a few companies. So my primary day-to-day job is I own a finance firm. I work in finance. I'm the CEO. I'm the managing director of it. And I also have a offshore call center in Quebec. I've got 70 members of staff in Quebec. So it's not small. I also have 150 sheep on a ranch that earns a little bit, and I own a pub in Quebec.
A pub.
So the pub is actually a part casino, part pub type thing. Does all right. It's just kind of a side gig, I suppose. So I have a few businesses here and there, and then obviously I do morning shots. So
there you go.
I'm actually I'm a lawyer by trade. So I'm a solicitor. I got my master's in law. I got my master's then in theology because I could. I then got an MBA, a DBA. So I'm actually Dr. Byron, but I never use it because I think it's pretentious bullshit. And yeah, so.
Oh, there you go. I think
that answers the question.
Yeah, I'm sure that does answer the question quite fully. And I think, look, I'm envious. I mean, I have 3 master's degrees, and putting them together doesn't equal a PhD, so I feel cheated.
Yeah, I love my PhD, and one of the reasons I never use the phrase Dr. Byron is actually because my PhD thesis was on around remote working. So I raised an argument that you could save a lot of money by getting rid of a lot of office buildings and making people work from home. Now, I wrote that thesis in 2017, but I actually got to see it in practice in 2020.
Yeah,
right?
with the pandemic, absolutely. You proved the proof in the pudding whether it works or not.
That's right.
And what's your take? Were you right?
No, I actually believe that I got pretty much all of it wrong, and a lot of it I believe I got wrong for reasons that I didn't actually understand, and a lot of them were due to human nature.
Yeah,
because it's all good and fine to look at the kind of the theoreticals on paper, and you're like, theoretically this makes sense, but then there's one fundamental thing that you tend to don't take into consideration, and that is that people are fundamentally lazy. They sit at home, they don't work, they don't want to work. They want to sit at home and they'll, have their hand down their pants and they'll drink beers all day and not do any actual work. And, all of a sudden their internet will be funny and this will happen and that will happen. And as a result, productivity goes to absolute crap.
Yep.
Now, when you write the thesis, you're assuming that people are narratively good-natured. They'll stay home, they'll do their best, they'll be very productive. Like, that's not that's not the real life, man. That's
Yep.
not how
Well,
it
I
happens.
look. It's pretty awesome. You have the humility to admit that you were completely wrong with your thesis, with your dissertation there. But listen, in the military, we've had video teleconferencing for decades. Over secure lines, and as a young officer, I saw the impact of it. It was too easy to get away with things, and eventually you get to where people don't even bother to show up for the VTCs, the video teleconferencing. You're like, what the hell? But the thing that I noticed from a leadership standpoint, and you would get this as the head of a firm, a leader. Not a manager, but an actual leader. There's a difference for those who don't recognize that. Managing resources and people is one thing. Leading them is quite different. You can be both, but you can't be a manager exclusively. Anyway, and lead people. But the thing I notice as a leader is that the intangibles that come from the human interaction face to face. You don't negotiate a peace agreement via teleconferencing. You don't negotiate a business deal successfully to where both parties feel comfortable and it goes forward successfully, normally through a Zoom session. That personal interaction of person being there, that means something to humans, whether they accept it or not, whether they believe it or not. If you go to a place, I mean, look, people say they love my content, they like me a lot, but my promising to go to South Africa had to be fulfilled. I had to go. And my first trip back to South Africa in August, September was brutal. For those of you who didn't watch my pace, it was brutal. I challenge any of you to keep the pace that I had. I mean, I kept the pace of an 18-year-old who was chasing a boar might see through the bush. That's the pace I had. I mean, every single day I was doing content. I was meeting people. We did 16 meet and greets. Look, I'm not boasting. What I'm saying is that was necessary, because I had to engage with people on a personal level who had committed and given so much to following my program, particularly after the censorship. And that's, I think, the part that's lost when we do these distance things, because humans are social creatures, except for maybe Ted Kaczynski, but humans are social creatures and they need that personal interaction. If they don't get it, then things just don't work out as well as they can. And I think that's maybe a piece, the intangible piece that was missing. And I suspect that you probably agree with what I just said.
Yeah, and I completely do, because as I say, like in theory, my entire thesis made a lot of sense. I mean, if you could free up office space, you could convert them into
you'd save rents on office space, you save petrol, you reduce the carbon footprint, people stay home, parking, less traffic accidents, less congestion. Yeah, it all sounds great on paper.
All those arguments.
But there's one problem: people are involved.
100%. And that's why I say fundamentally that was the flaw in my thesis. And on paper, obviously I got my doctorate, so it worked, but it didn't actually make actual sense when you actually put it in practice. It's like communism, right? I mean, communism.
Oh, it sounds great on paper.
You have to do it, and then you're like, oh, actually, it don't work that way. And it was a bit like this with my thesis. Like, I actually, as I say, I got to see it first-hand experience during COVID. I never thought I would. It would always be one of those things that I could write about and never actually have to test, but unfortunately I did, thanks to the global scamdemic. As a result, as I say, now I don't even use the doctor title. I feel a little bit like a sham. I wrote this DPA and I had all these great ideas, but
well,
rubbish.
I need to do this very quickly here. So Rolf Korver was giving chats early. He gave a 14 rand. He said, how come only 14? They did a 50. And I challenged his credit rating. And so he gave a 500 rand super chat. So Rolf, I didn't miss your super chat. Thank you for that. And I'm going to take this moment to challenge everybody's credit rating. I think you all have poor credit. And the only way to prove that you have good credit is to super chat. And if you think I'm e-begging, go tell Scott Balsack that I've been e-begging today, because he needs to know that if you can find him.
You want to see e-begging in action, you've got to go see Ronaldo, man. That guy will do stripper chats and everything. Anything for a $5. Right?
Anything for a $5. Yeah, well, listen. We can come back to Roman and his zapper. What the hell was that for the first year of his program? He always had that zapper thing up there. That was too funny. Oh, my goodness. But listen, Byron, so someone asked earlier about January 6th. I prattled on about January 6th early in the broadcast. What are your thoughts? I mean, I suspect they haven't changed, but if they've changed, have your views on what did or didn't transpire on January 6th changed in any way as a consequence of the recent release of these public domain tapes that Tucker Carlson sharing, or do you have the same view about what happened?
No, I think everything is exactly as we thought it was, right? I mean, the funny thing is, Ramon and I actually did some videos on the whole January 6th thing, and then they did absolutely abysmal. They went to absolute shit, so no one cared.
Nobody cared,
So as a result, we just stopped commenting on it. But I think if you look at the whole January 6th thing, it did look like they would And we knew this all the way at the start, right? We knew that they were let in. They were basically doing a peaceful protest. They kind of walked around as if it was a guided tour. They walked around the place and then kind of left. And, a few people maybe pushed over a couple flags and did nothing really serious. But it seemed very harmless. Certainly, we've seen protests. We know what protests look like in South Africa. And that wasn't a protest. That was a tour. And but they didn't spin it that way. As you know, we had the January 6th commissions, which was just there as basically a witch hunt trial to basically convict anybody that they could, just to show that it was the worst event ever to happen to the United States outside of Pearl Harbor. We actually heard that narrative, didn't we?
Kamala Harris made the claim it was worse than Pearl Harbor 9/11. What an idiot.
That's right. So, the reality is all this has done now is provided the video footage evidence of the allegations made. The question, though, that I think should be on everybody's mind is, now that we know all of this, and even if it did or didn't change our minds, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I would argue that no, it doesn't, because unfortunately politics in your country was once very smart, but what we've seen within the last 4 years is, like my country, politics has become really stupid. And the people actually voting, like, let's be honest, every Democrat city is just a complete hellhole. There's whole books written on this about how every Democrat city is just a shithole of note.
Yeah.
California is a great example. It's got the biggest net immigration there. Everybody's fleeing California en masse and going elsewhere, most of them to Texas or to Florida or somewhere like that. But that is like the heartland of the Democrat type policies. But nobody's stopping to go, maybe we should stop voting for these guys, because they're a little bit like And what we've seen within the last midterms, as you know, is that there was some individuals or some places where they actually voted for somebody who was mentally retarded versus the Republican candidate, because at least he was a Democrat, right? I mean, he had half a brain cell and couldn't really keep a sentence together and had to be prompted on paper what to say. But, at least he wasn't a Republican. And unfortunately, that level of retardation now of your politics is, all I can say is it's nice to see that South Africa is rubbing off on the US. That's all I can say.
Well, thanks for putting us in the cock. Yeah, so might be talking about Senator John Fetterman here in Pennsylvania, who suffered a stroke and then was elected to office just because he's a Democrat. It's quite frightening. We had a dead Democratic congressman who died 6 weeks before the election, who overwhelmingly won his district in Pennsylvania.
There you go. Dead guy wins over the Republican.
Exactly. These people are stupid. I mean, unbelievably stupid. It's crazy. So another super chat came in after I challenged people's credit rating. Lea Van Janssen van Rensburg says, my credit rating is a disaster thanks to load shedding and having to buy my own power. Yeah, no doubt about that. But thank you for the 200 Rand super chat. That's very awesome of you. Yeah, so yeah, I think that I can't disagree with you. The politics in America has become really stupid in the last 20 years. It's gotten progressively worse. It started with the demonization of George Walker Bush. And I'm not a fan. I voted for him, but I'm not a fan. He's not a conservative. He's a big government clown. But the demonization of him about Iraq and Afghanistan, the lies told about Iraq and Afghanistan, whether you agree with the war or not, there was legitimate reason for action in Iraq and Afghanistan. But anyway, just the games that the Democrats played, they show no shame. I mean, look at what happened when Trump had a private classified discussion with members of the Senate in the White House in the Oval Office. And he said, someone raised about, an issue about giving money to Haiti. He says, I'm tired of giving money to countries like Haiti and crap old countries in Africa. That's what he said. So they couldn't wait to go from that classified discussion to run out to the press and stand before the lectern. Donald Trump said Africa shit whole countries. They didn't care about the damage it did to America's reputation, because that's a private conversation. If you can't have a private conversation in a classified setting without any fear that someone's going to share what you said, then you can't have a frank discussion. And that's what happened there. Donald Trump was pissed off we're giving money to countries that were wasting it, and that's the bottom line. But he said it in a crude, crass fashion. That should have been a private conversation, not one for the public. But they don't care the damage. Donald Trump calls Volodymyr Zelensky to congratulate him on his electoral win, and then they accuse him of shutting down arms shipments to Ukraine. The irony being, of course, that Barack Obama refused to send lethal weapons to Ukraine when the Crimea was attacked and annexed by Vladimir Putin. They facilitated the theft of Crimea by Vladimir Putin, the Democratic Party, and Barack Obama. And then Donald Trump comes in and he approves the sale of Javelin defensive weapon systems, offensive weapon systems to the Ukraine. And then they accuse him of trying to stop him from being delivered. He's the one that authorized it. He signed the damn letter, or signed the order, the law that made it possible to give them weapons. These people have no shame. Oh, Mark DeVilliers. Would that be Mark DeVilliers, the guy that wrote the book about white tribe dreaming? Is he still alive? Anyway, I read that when I was a kid. But but seriously, these people, they have no shame. They'll lie about everything. Republicans are racist. They want to enslave you. Excuse me. The Republican Party exists because of suffrage, because of abolition, because of the desire to get women the right to vote and the desire to end the abomination of slavery. That's the only reason the Republican Party was formed in the 1850s. And within less than a decade, they captured the White House. And then racist Democrats in the South tried to break away their own country. And we fought a war. 7 of my 8 great-great-grandfathers fought in Union regiments to end slavery and preserve the Union. I want reparations. Pay me now.
Absolutely. So just to address actually one of the comments, which is actually in similar line to this, it's Anthony Jenkins says that they work for ESCOM and they do a long day, and this is just to keep the lights on. So I actually don't want to address the comment itself. What I want to address is the idea behind it, and that is, it's funny that I'll first talk about my country and then relate it to your own. But in my country, it's like everybody kind of complains because they have to do like some work and life is pretty tough. They have to kind of struggle a little bit to get their job and to keep the lights on, to feed the family and to keep people safe. And they always want to look for something that is easier. It's an easier life. It's somewhere that they can kind of kick back, get a good salary, not really have to worry about things too much. And it's sometimes worthwhile reminding ourselves where we are in 2023. And that is where we are not. And where we are not is 100 years ago or 150 years ago when our ancestors came to the shores and they had the caravans and they were getting hunted by lions and people were getting bitten by snakes every day and they were foot trekking over mountains. The mortality rate was absolutely horrendous. Even when you did find a farm, it was very likely to be burnt down by local populace. Like, life was a hell of a lot harder in the past, like a hell of a lot. Even in the US, you have a very similar experience. As you know, we talked about this the other day with, the original settlers that were there crossing across the US with the Great Treks. And people seem to think that because life is no longer that degree of hardship, that it's almost like there should be no hardship in their life, and they forget where we were. And sometimes it's worthwhile to remind people that where you were, you will go back to. Life will get that hard again. And it's very easy to kind of constantly claim the give me something. I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to do that. But that betrays the simple fact of life. Life is not simple. Life is difficult. Sometimes things are hard. You just sometimes have to get on and do the hard work. You couldn't sit there in World War I and say, I wonder if this trench ladder here was safe. And we haven't been trained on how to go up and down. And, health and safety risk on it. There's a few splinters on it. Like, couldn't do that. You just had to kind of get on with life and try and make the best out of the situation you were in, which often led to your death because you were given a shot. It's amazing how that mentality seems to have disappeared out of people now. And everything's about victim cultures and victim narratives and about give me, you owe me. It's really shameful. Like the West has really fallen in that respect.
Well, it says a lot about human nature, and people are just crap. Not all people, but I mean, seriously, you talk about things. You didn't even talk about all the dangers out there: smallpox and diphtheria and tetanus and typhus and cholera and malaria, which is what halted the advance of white colonization, European colonization into southern Africa. They got to the Zambezi, and that's pretty much it. Once you get the Zambezi, then you've got malaria. You get it before there, but you get malaria, then you get the tsetse fly on top of that, and your cattle. So it's not just your people die, but your cattle die, and that was a major impediment to European colonization. If you look at Ghana, the Gold Coast, there is a very small white European population there today, but they exist because of prophylactics and because a lot of the malaria has been wiped out. But there would be a massive white population in Ghana if it were not for malaria and other tropical diseases. I mean, hundreds of thousands of Brits went there and they died in mass. So, always hearing about the biological warfare of Europeans against Native Americans. Well, Africa's biological warfare against Europeans was quite brutal too. And you only see major white populations in places where malaria and other tropical diseases couldn't wipe them out, like the highlands of Kenya, like southern Africa, Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia. These places had large populations. Mozambique and Angola to some degree, although Mozambique is mostly tropical, but they held on nonetheless. You don't see massive white populations. You did see massive white Europe populations in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Algeria, in Morocco. In fact, Egyptian dynasties were founded by Greeks and by Romans, entirely. So, it's people seem to have lost sight of things, They run around, oh, you don't have the jab, evil. There were no jabs before Edward Jenner scraped somebody's skin with cowpox to see what would happen. That's when vaccination. By the way, the word vaccine comes from cow because it was about milkmaids and cowpox. That's how we finally discovered that we could do this vaccination stuff. And now we got idiots running around. If you're not jabbed, bunch of Karens. It's really, what a crazy world. I said Kenya, Charles. I said Kenya, the highlands of Kenya, coffee plantations.
Yeah, so one person actually said in the comment section, I don't mind struggling to keep food on the table. That's life, right? And yep. I agree, that is life, unfortunately. But it says, but being scared and not getting opportunities because you're white in SA, also not a way to live.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you know what? You know what's really interesting that people tend to forget, because again, this is remember what we said at the start of this? Politics in South Africa is really dumb. And what people fail to understand is that racial quotas are no longer just a South African thing. Those racial quotas, California is a great example. To be appointed to a board of directors in California, they actually have racial quotas. You have to have so many whites and blacks and males and females. That's actually a requirement according to Californian law. It is also a requirement now in a lot of the institutions, even in the United Kingdom. The Welsh government says they feel that there's a great disproportionality between the whites and the blacks, even though the whites account for 96%.
Yeah, there are no blacks in Wales. Have they been to Wales?
but it's still, they still don't care, right? They still don't care as far as they're concerned.
So you wind up with disproportional representation of people who are overrepresented and many not qualified 100%. Simply because their skin pigmentation. Yep.
100%. And if you want proof of that, just watch British TV. You can see every single TV advert now includes either a white, coloured, or whatever family. But what you will very rarely find is he has two white people with a white child, because the representation or the requirements to do representation on British TV have gone the complete other way. And you could say, well, that means that there's a Western bias against white people. Well, I'd agree with that. I completely agree with that.
Yep.
But to assume that South Africa is the only country with a bias against white people is a little bit mistaken. It's a very centralized version of a lifestyle. You say, okay, well, only we have those problems.
No. We've had that before you did. You still had the system of apartheid, the National Party, when we had affirmative action implemented in this country in the 1970s, and we had busing.
100%.
So in our country, most schools, public schools, are funded by local property taxes. So people that live in wealthier areas pay more property taxes because the value is higher. That raises more money for school districts. They have better equipment, better schools, better teachers. That's just the reality of life. And what happened in the 1970s to skew the racial balance, they took white students from rural schools that were all white, bused them for an hour and a half every morning, an hour and a half every night to go interracial. Oops, we lost Byron there. To go to, are you still there, Byron? The camera went out. Yeah. So they bused white students to black schools, majority black schools in urban areas, and they took black students and sent them to white schools, putting these kids on buses for up to 3 hours per day. That wasn't right. That wasn't just. So we've had this long before South Africa did. It's just that there wasn't any objection to it because over 80% of the country was white. And they didn't feel like the occasional person was inconvenienced by this nonsense really wasn't a problem. But in fact, it was a problem. And we see where it's at today. And now we hear this nonsense by people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, by the way, is white. Yes, she's a Latina, but she's a white Latina, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And we hear idiots like that and Ayanna Pressley talk about white fragility. White people are terrified of losing out. Well, there's no such thing as white fragility, but if it did exist, it would be easy to understand, given that not any commercial in this country is a true representation of the demographics of this country, given that no news broadcast is a true representation of the demographics of this country, given that everything that's happening in government is not a true representation. There is actually federal law that forces districting to ensure that blacks Americans get overrepresented in Congress. And that's just the reality of what's going on here. We've been dealing with this for decades, but as I said, with over 80% of the population having been white when this was going on back to 1970. You go back to 1960, before the Immigration Act was changed because Ted Kennedy pushed to try to get more Irish in here, but ironically let a flood of people from around the world come in here. If you go back to that time, nearly 90% of America was white. A country of 180 million people was 90% white. The reason why women are voting is because of old white men. They're the ones that changed the law. The reason that black Americans vote is because of white men, old white men. They changed the law and changed the Constitution. The reason why millions of people of color have flooded into America is because of old white men in Congress in the 1960s who allowed it to happen. Yet we are accused of being racist after our magnanimity and our generosity at letting the world flood our country and become Americans. We are the bigots. We are the racists. But it's old white men. I guess I'm not calling myself an old white man, but it's white men who allowed all this to happen. Not the rest of the world. Women didn't change things. Black folks didn't change things. They played a role. They were angry. But the people who had the power are the ones who changed it. And it was white guys. But white guys are the demons. Stop it. I'm sick of it. But we've been dealing with this for a long time. I just think a lot of Americans didn't realize how much discrimination was going on against the majority of Americans. And now they've woken up to it.
Yeah, but that's exactly why I say the comment that I do, and that is that in South Africa we tend to think that for whatever reason that we're the only ones that are subjected to this kind of discrimination, and the reality of the situation is very far from the truth. You find this in a lot of countries around the world. So what that should show you as an individual is that, to be honest, there is no centralized utopia. It doesn't matter where you go and you think you're going to get an easier time. Like, life is going to be difficult regardless of where you are. And the typical response to that is, well, I don't want to struggle. Like, I want an easier life. And yes, okay, so does everybody. But if you think about the life that you still live, even now, the life you still live now is still ridiculously easier than it was for our ancestors. So our ancestors were able to make a go of it. They were able to do it in a far easier way than we are, because they understood something that most people today don't understand. And that is, life is tough. You're going to have to work hard. Things are not going to be easy. They're not going to be given to you. And as a result, life, you will struggle and you will experience difficulty. We don't seem to have that expectation anymore. And in South Africa, and I think this also extends to your own country, whenever we encounter that difficulty or that discomfort, the natural response is, well, let me move to somewhere where that discomfort doesn't exist.
Yeah,
right?
Rather than fix it.
100%. And it's funny, it's one of the things I say to Ramon also that I find really weird about South Africa. And when I say this to you, I think you'll understand. But you know what you never find in the US, right? Is you never find people go, you know what, the US, in my hometown, things aren't going very well. I need to immigrate. No matter what, I need to immigrate. Like, everybody will say to you, right, US is our country, like USA, whatever, Britain, American pride, who cares? Okay, and they'll all be like, we need to fix it. In my country, no one says that. We are all raised to believe that life outside of Africa is easier. We must all immigrate. And screw South Africa, it's not worth saving, it's just a shithole and a half, and immigrate. But you never hear that. Like, even in the UK, I know a lot of people in the UK that say, life is very difficult. But I never hear people talk to me about, I'm going to immigrate. I never hear it in the US. I know people in the US. Like, in my 20s, I was a semi-pro fighter. I spent a shitload of time in California because that's where all my fights were. So, I know a lot of people there still, but none of them say to me, as regardless of how crap things get, they're not like, I'm going to immigrate. South Africans, I lost my job today. I'm immigrating. I'm going to Australia. Like, it's just really weird, man. Like, yeah. I don't know where that kind of mentality came into my countrymen, but it's there and it's undeniable.
It's true. It is. And it's not just white South Africans. It's black and brown South Africans of the same view. They
100%.
think grass is greener. I mean, when I was in New Zealand for the 2011 World Cup, it was fascinating. When I was in Auckland, I was surrounded by Afrikaners who had migrated to Auckland. There were thousands of them. When I went to the South Africa versus Namibia game, which was a slaughter, Namibia got destroyed. Surprise. But I saw them all over Auckland. And when I went to Wellington, I was shocked because I was surrounded by South Africans again. But there were overwhelmingly colored South Africans. For some reason, a large group of colored South Africans had migrated to Wellington. It's a lovely spot. I don't blame him. But I think a lot of South Africans in Australia, the penal colony, and in New Zealand and in UK are having second thoughts and regrets after seeing the repressive nature of those regimes in lockdown and what they've done. They've taken free democratic societies and turned them into totalitarian fascist states. Dan Andrews, Scott Morrison in Australia, Jacinda Ardern, Mr. Ed, who's no longer in government because she's a wuss and knew she was going to get slaughtered. So rather than stand up like a man or woman and take the defeat, she ran away so she can fight another day. And we're seeing it all over. But the UK, banning demonstrations, what the hell is that? This is a country that gave us limitations on the monarchy in 1215 with the Magna Carta, starting us down the path to modern representative democratic government, and they were banning demonstrations. These people are sick. And what if you say something that Christian preacher who was saying he saw some trans or some dude, I don't know what the person was, dressed in drag.
So he got sentenced, or he got reported to counterterrorism.
Right, that's where I'm going. Counterterrorism. Yeah. He's a threat to public order because he has protected speech. He was doing a religious sermon. He was speaking. He was physically assaulted. He was physically assaulted. He was robbed. And no charges against anybody that assaulted him, but he was charged and convicted and sentenced to community service and then reported to counterterrorism.
Absolutely. So I would completely agree with that. So what he actually got convicted, or not convicted, but he got accused of, is he basically said he doesn't believe in trans ideology. There's only a male and a female.
Right.
Now, 10 years ago, that would have been like, and okay, nah. But now it's like, I know it's protected speech, right? You're not allowed to say anything against the alphabet crowd because that would be very difficult. And so in the UK we have these amazing things called public order offences. They're basically public order offences is basically anything that they want you to be guilty of. It's like a catch-all, right? Yeah. So what you eventually have is you get this thing here as well that we call hate speech. It's like any speech that basically somebody doesn't like, and the definition of it is any speech that causes offence. Well, unfortunately, I can say good morning to some people, and that's an offence. So what you get is you get these public order offences, which is like a catch-all for anything, and then you combine it with a hate speech, which is something that causes offence. So that's actually what he got convicted of or accused of. Now, the brilliance about these things, and the reason that they're so contentious, is that they don't require going to a court. They still get recorded on your record without trial, and it doesn't require a judge to certify it. It doesn't even require a trial. They can say that what we've given you is we've given you a public order offence for it's like an on-the-spot fine, and as a result, we're recording the public order offence as a form of hate speech. So now that individual basically has a hate speech conviction against their names, never been through a court, never been tried, convicted, never been before a group of peers, and all he's basically done is just say, well, if you think about it, all I said is, well, there's only two genders. And that's the state of the legal system now in the UK. Now, you may say, okay, well, that's really extreme, but these things are becoming more and more popular. Every time you criticize a politician because you don't like a point that they're taking, hate speech. Every time you come up with an edgy meme, hate speech. Every time you turn around and say, I don't like the immigration rules, hate speech. And so on and on and on it goes, which means that if you actually look at it from a totalitarian point of view, it's very difficult to say something here now that doesn't get you into cuck, because unfortunately everything you say offends someone, and everybody knows that if I'm offended, I just report you. Right?
This is Soviet test. This is a disgrace. This is why this country has gone down the shit, and the UK has fallen. What's that movie? Olympus Has Fallen. This is a perfect example. This country is just it's half baked. I mean, I saw the Falklands veteran in his 50s, who retweeted the tweet that the guy took the LGBTQ flag and put it together and put it in because it matched the swastika, and he retweeted it. Someone reported him.
That's Lawrence Fox.
Yes,
Lawrence Fox is a politician.
The guy that did it's a politician, not the Falklands veteran.
So what happened was Lawrence Fox is the guy who got into shit for it because he retweeted it.
Oh, so
there was another guy. Who put it together and it was fine, but Lawrence Fox retweeted it. Now, because Lawrence Fox is a right-wing conservative, even though he's not really, like somebody went out there and they were like, right, I'm going to get Lawrence Fox. I don't like him. So they reported Lawrence. So Lawrence actually said, when he got reported, he's like, I didn't even create this, right? I retweeted it.
Right.
So it's even worse. It's a retweet, but I'm the one that got into shit for it. So it's like, it's actually far worse than even where you're alluding to, which is I did it, therefore I did it as a degree of intention. The guy actually got into shit for it, didn't even do it. He retweeted it.
Yeah, I know. And then what they did is they came to his house and threatened him, and he told him to leave. You don't have a warrant. So then they came back on a Sunday to embarrass him in front of his neighbors and arrested him, 53-year-old Falklands veteran, or 57-year-old, something like that. And this is not a country. This is a fascist state. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And that's where the UK is. And it's not a place I want to live. I was going to go do a PhD there, but I'm not interested now. There were a couple programs I was going to go to, but not interested.
PhD on remote working, yeah?
No, not a remote working, but on Africa, Africa's future. Yeah, no, I was going to do a PhD at a couple different programs there in the UK because I qualify for a full new GI Bill, which is very generous. It pays thousands of dollars tuition, gives me a housing allowance tax-free. It's wonderful, just by virtue of having served during combat in this war. So anyway, listen, I'd love to stay. I mean, we've got 125 people here. It's an awesome audience, but I don't want to overstay our welcome. And I think what I want to do, Byron, is if you're keen, if you're interested, I lost my answer the question session with Rob Hutchison. That was a weekly program. I'm not asking you to come on weekly, but it was a weekly program in which we just shot the crap about politics in South Africa primarily, but also in the U.S. It was really popular segment, but Rob has just disappeared. I haven't heard from him since he was on, since Roman and Gideon came on my program. So I wish him well, but it's gone. But if you're interested, I think people enjoy this interaction between us, and if you'd like to come back and do this again or periodically, I'd be up for that. We'll come up with a cool name for it if you want. Will Roman let you do it?
I'll ask him. I'm sure it'll be fun, mate. There's actually just a couple of comments I just want to address in the conversation before we go. So what one person says about this is the immigration topic. They said, because you don't hear kill the Boer, kill the farmer, and BEE. But again, this is exactly what I mean, right? South Africans are really kind of insular because I sit there and I see all of the memes. I see all of the video footage in the US where there was recently one that went viral, and it was actually around the time when you had the George Floyd riots, and that was some people's homes were set on fire, and they were basically all running around shouting, "Is that a white home? Because if it is, lock the door, make sure the people stay inside. Is that whites? Kill them, kill them, kill them." I saw those videos, and they are not unusual. There is now a couple, even Twitter accounts that just go to expose the amount of black on white violence that there is and how much hate there is towards some of the white people in the US by their black counterparts. And a lot of people now are using the whole Scott Adam kind of meme as the response for it, which is very funny. But the idea that this kind of anti-white rhetoric is just a South African thing, it shows you that there's an insulation of politics. I know what's happening in my country, but I have no idea what's happening somewhere else. And that's unfortunately why people view those kind of issues through a very kind of closed lens. Now, where somebody else also says, well, if you think about it, the immigration thing is voortrekker mentality. You're right. You could argue that it's voortrekker mentality, and I could understand why you would say that. However, what you're failing to understand is that the voortrekkers moved here for a better life, and they sacrificed a lot to give it to us. We shouldn't throw that away. It's part of our heritage. It's who we are. They sacrificed lives, livelihoods. They moved people they knew to give us a country that was our own. And what we do every time we leave and we just go, oh, it's not worth it, because racism or something, you betray the ancestors that came before you. And there's an old saying, and that is, if you have no respect for the dead, if you cannot respect the dead, you cannot respect the future. And I agree with that, because the dead are gone and they have given to you what they have given to you. And if you cannot respect them and show the respect for the sacrifices they made, you're not entitled to a future. And it's very interesting to watch our countrymen around the world, because they all feel like they don't have a future. And maybe part of the problem for that is because you had a country and you gave it up. Your ancestors sacrificed a lot to give it to you, but you gave it up because you thought life would be easier somewhere else. And the moral of the story of what I'm trying to say is life is never easier somewhere else. No. You seem to think that you don't have the same problem somewhere else, but unfortunately you do. You just don't know about them, and the reason you don't know about them is because you don't live there. But make no mistake, once you get there, you're going to experience that. And unfortunately, Chris, this is something that we talked about an hour ago, and that is, once you get there, you do tie yourself into a trap, and the ability to reverse that mistake becomes harder and harder, to the point where you have to go, I have to live with the choices I've made, and it might not have been the best one, but I have no options now. This is where I am. And unfortunately, you find that in a lot of South Africans. And it's really weird because, as we said, you don't find that in Americans. They're not like, I'm going to immigrate. You don't find it in the British. And make no mistake, the British are unhappy with the status quo. They don't just go, I'm going to immigrate.
They have a lot of reason to leave the country. They really do.
Absolutely.
But you don't see it, but you are seeing a trend here in America, which you alluded to earlier, in semigration, kind of like folks moving to Western Cape and South Africa. We have a lot of Americans fleeing New York, New Jersey, and California for better destinations. It is a real phenomenon, and it is happening in shocking numbers. As a consequence, boy, I'll tell you what, if you had property in Florida, right now is a good time to own property in Florida because you're going to make a fortune, because they're getting over 1,000 new migrants from within the country moving, and that's not even including criminal alien invaders. I'm talking about American citizens moving to Florida every single day. Can you imagine 1,000 people moving to a state that small? That'd be like 1,000 people moving to the Western Cape. Wait, that's already happening. No, every day. No, but seriously. But it is really sad to see people, and I've said this all along because people always ask me for advice about leaving the country, and I said it's sad that you feel the need to leave your country. My 17th great uncle, Sir Francis Wyatt, was appointed the first royal governor of the Jamestown colony of Virginia in 1621. He arrived here. There were previously company governors because the Jamestown Company was running it as a private venture. But the king said, enough of this nonsense. He sent Sir Francis Wyatt, my 17th great uncle. His brother, the Reverend Hout Wyatt, is the progenitor of the Wyatt line in North America, the main Wyatt line. There are 90,000 of us living in North America today from that line. But they came in 1621. I will never ever surrender the land that we carved out and we fought for and we created, and this brilliant democracy and republic, representative republic, which is being pissed on by politicians all over this country, particularly in Harrisburg, right down the street from me, and in Washington, D.C. I will never surrender it. I spent 36 years of my life supporting and defending the Constitution. Not President Reagan, not President Obama, not President Trump, not President Biden. I supported and defended the Constitution of the United States because it's the most brilliantly written document in the history of mankind, protecting the rights of all Americans. And I will stay and fight for what is right until they pull that firearm from my dead cold hands.
and it's funny because Seamus has said, Irish by birth, South African by choice, and I'm really glad somebody said that.
That's cool.
This is another thing that I also find, and I find it really weird in South Africa. I know a lot of British people, German people, Irish people that have immigrated to South Africa, and it's amazing to actually talk to them about the struggles in South Africa, because all of them will say to you categorically, yeah, but I will never go back because my quality of life here is 50 times better than it is there. And yet you have the same South Africans who are then saying, yeah, but I want to go there because my quality of life is really bad here. Now, a statistic that isn't actually really looked after very well is that every year 50,000 South Africans immigrate out of the United Kingdom, and they go to, they immigrate from South Africa and they go to the United Kingdom. You know, the other part that isn't actually taken into account, there's nearly 200,000 British that moved to South Africa in reverse. Now I'll ask you a question. Why are the British coming here in more numbers than the South Africans are going there? Right? And this actually recently got raised with an individual here in South Africa, which is Peter Hitchens. He's one of these far-right newspaper commentators. And I actually said to him, like, what do you think about, and they were South African, they said, what do you think about South Africans moving to the UK? And he says, do you not find it funny that as a Brit who tells people to immigrate every day, you're asking me whether people should come here? Do you not find that weird? it was just an off-the-cuff comment, but it's amazing how many people don't stop to consider that. And all you will get in rhetoric to that is a lot of whataboutism. Yeah, but. One time, yeah, but. Look, I understand not every situation is the same, and some people have to leave for economic reasons. But it's also important to remember that what you are doing is you are going abroad as an economic migrant. You're not going for a better quality of life, because, to be frank, your quality of life in Africa is actually pretty good. And if you live in one of the shithole cities, like where Amon lives, Gauteng, sorry, Amon, for the shithole, then why don't you move to a proper city like Port Elizabeth, where it's still relatively quiet, okay. The crime is actually relatively low.
I got to call bullshit on that. A proper city like Port Elizabeth. Okay, I'll go with Hermanus. I'll go with, let's see, I'll even go with Rustenburg before I say Port Elizabeth is a proper city. Howick, that's a place on the rise.
Rustenburg, ugh. But, in fairness, like, there's plenty of places you could go to. You could say, well, in response to Erica, you could say, okay, well, Mums and Toti is a shithole. And to be honest, it probably is. But where isn't a shithole? George, Knysna,
yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever been there? Because they're amazing.
I
They're
have, yeah.
amazing places.
I have.
What about, there's all those places along the Garden Route. Some of them are phenomenal. I love going to. If I could, I'd probably live in George if I had like a choice of all the places.
Yeah, George is a good spot.
Fantastic place.
It is.
But I'm also very happy where I live. I love the Eastern Cape. I love where I live. I love the fact that it is a shithole, and I can get this massive piece of land that's my own, and I can do my own thing on it. I probably couldn't afford it in the Western Cape, but at the end of the day, the reality is, it's funny that how often I speak to South Africans and I say, "Have you ever been to here?" And they go, "No." And you say, "Okay, well, where have you been?" "Well, I live in Durban, and I've been to Pietermaritzburg, and I've been to Durban Central, and I've lived in my little place." And you're like, and you think that's representative of South Africa, do you? Because it's a rather large space, huh?
I have been to more of South Africa, multiple times more than 98% of South Africans. I have been to virtually every province in the country multiple times. And it is interesting. You're right. What we're talking about here about mindsets and things like that. But I mean, look, people just get so easily latched into things and they just accept things. The problem with South Africa is South Africans have become inured in many respects to the way things are, and they're just inflexible. And that's kind of crazy. But, they're not alone. That world, it's not just South Africans. It's around the world it happens. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, Indy says, no, George is boring as F. That's funny. But he also says the PE is fantastic. Best beaches. What are you talking about? I've been to those beaches. Excellent people.
Jeffreys Bay, mate. Jeffreys Bay. You've been to our beaches.
Low cost of living.
Mate. Phenomenal.
Low cost of living. Look, I'll tell you what, at 18 to 1 and 20 to 1, everything in South Africa is a low cost of living for me. So it doesn't matter where you're at. And your petrol, despite your taxes going up all the time, is not much different than what I pay in the States. So Mossel Bay is nice. Yeah, Mossel Bay, but the traffic is pretty horrendous for a small town like that. Simonstown. Seamus says Simonstown. I'll tell you where I would want to live, and I'll be straight about this right now because it's where all the rich people live. Somerset West. That's the place I want to live.
I always say this to people, and it's always worthwhile for me to say it again. I'm rich enough and I'm ugly enough to live wherever I want in the world. I don't have to live in South Africa. I have the money to live anywhere, but I choose to live there because I still maintain it is one of the best places in the world to live. I know lots of South Africans don't share that view, but I've lived elsewhere. I spent a year of my life in Japan. It was a lovely experience, not that great. I spent a shit load of time in the US as a fighter. It's all right. It's nice, but it's not my country. I spent a very long time in Europe. Like, I have traveled the world. I've got brothers in other ends of the world. I know the experiences that they have. I speak to my brothers. And at the end of the day, I was born in Africa. I want to die in Africa. It's where my ancestors came from. I want my kids to be born there. I want my kids to be raised there. I want my kids to be South African, so that one day I can actually have those experiences with them and I can talk to them on a level playing field and I can understand them and they'll understand me. Because one of the things people fail to understand is, as a South African, when you move to Australia with your kids, do you know what you're raising? An Australian. You're not raising a South African.
You're not raising an Afrikaner. You're not raising a Boer. No. You're raising an Australian. That's the sad part about this, particularly for a group of people that it was forged from Dutch, German, Huguenot, and Khoi stock, among others, but primarily those groups, people who developed a culture, a language of their own, a faith of their own, a whole people that were created out of an amalgamation of peoples in the Western Cape originally, to spread themselves in Perth and in Tasmania and in Melbourne and in New Zealand and UK. After a generation, your people cease to exist. That's your people talk about genocide, cultural genocide. That's your own genocide. And I'm not criticizing people for making a decision, but you have to make a cognizant decision that are your people, are your folk. Whether you're Xhosa or you're Zulu or you're Afrikaner, is that important to you? Because if it's not, okay, fine. But it's important to you and you leave, those people die out. They won't be around anymore. So, by the way, we do need to contact Ronaldo's little beach patrol that he set up there in Port Elizabeth to ensure the beaches are safe. I've found out who has been letting their horse shit all over the beach. It's Indy L. He's been riding on the beach with his horses, and now we know where all the horse shit on the beach is coming from. He's been polluting the beaches. I'm going to turn you into Ronaldo Jos so he can send his little security patrol after you.
The scientist says, can I say something in Japanese? Hi, wakarimasu. But I actually learned how to speak fluent Japanese when I was there. But anyway, the point is, and I'm actually really happy to see this because remember what I told you like 30 minutes ago, how angry people get when you start to actually talk about Africa and you're like, oh, but what aboutism? Check the chat section, man. Like, how many people are like, yeah, but what about the finances and what about the safety and you have the money and no. Like, it's really weird to watch people just get really, really upset by it. But the fact of the matter is, you leave Africa, you're no longer African, my friends. Yeah. And the problem is, I'm going to use the example now of my brother, my eldest brother. So my eldest brother lives in Washington. He went there for his 2 kids. His eldest kid was raised through the schools in Washington. So as I'm sure you can imagine, she's proper one of these blue-haired snowflake Democrats. You know the type. Yep. You know the type that was screaming their heads off at Donald Trump.
Yep.
And she refuses to speak to her dad now. She's now 17. She's gone through the school system there. She refuses to speak to her father because she says he's a white beneficiary of apartheid and his ancestors all were, built on the back of black slavery, and how dare you have this opinion, that opinion. And as a result, she's actually run away from home now. And I spoke to him the other day on the phone. He's crying his eyes out. He's like, I feel like I failed my kids. And it's like, and I had to explain something to him, and that is, your kids have gone through the schooling system in the US. You have raised an American. That is the American culture. Don't take it personally. It wasn't your failure as a father. It's just the culture she's gone in. She's been in that school. She's gone through that education system. You may have tried to sit there, go to school, go to work, doing your long hours. But unfortunately, when your kids are in public schools, your kids they become products of public schools. And that is the product of a public school. Yeah. So don't take it personally. And he said to me, he said, I wish I'd never come here because, yes, life was hard in South Africa, but at least my kids were my own. And you're like, but that's the point I'm making. Yeah. When you go there, you don't raise a South African. You raise a person, you raise a Washington Democrat. Like, what did you think was going to happen? Were you going to make them somehow Buramaisi? Like, it's not going to happen, my friends. Like, that's not how it goes. And so you have to take that into consideration. Like, you can say, well, I'm taking my kids for a better opportunity. And I say this to people too. Is there anything that stops your kid? If you get your kid through school, they get educated, what stops your kid getting to a point, they've got their degree in, I don't know, veterinarian science, and then they go, you know what, Africa's not for me, I'm going to Australia. Anything to stop them? Any laws? Anything that prohibits them from doing that? So to say, hey, well, I'm doing it for them, it's like, it's not always true though, because what you're actually saying is, there are greater opportunities abroad for me. I am hoping that when my kids get to my age, those opportunities will still exist. And the point of what we were talking about an hour and a half ago is that quite often those opportunities no longer exist. In fact, life changes. To assume that the country you're going to will stay the same is a fallacy. What will typically tend to happen is that you're 100%. And then the opportunities you think your children are going to get are no longer there. Because now, all of a sudden, the society doesn't look the same as when you arrived. And I have that actual experience of the UK from 1998. When I arrived here, I moved to Milton Keynes. There was like 0 black people. Like, I remember the first time I saw a black guy, because he was actually from South Africa. We were wearing a rugby t-shirt. And he walked over and he had a 2-hour conversation with us. He was like, wow, a foreign person. Right? That's what it was like in 98. I promise you that's not what it's like now. Now you'll be walking around trying to spot the British person being there for hours and be like, I don't know where they are.
Just go to Leicester. Only 26% of the population's English. An English city. Go to Luton, where less than 10% of the population is English. You'd think you're in a Middle Eastern bazaar walking around Luton, the streets of Luton. It's not England. It's not the United Kingdom. And these are people, unlike America, who are not adopting English and British culture and becoming British. They are remaining what they are and bifurcating and destroying society. In America, historically, people came here wherever they were from and became Americans and adopted our cultural norms and added their unique things to our culture and enriched our culture. Now, we intentionally have leftists trying to divide our country on language. We are not a Spanish-speaking country. We are an English-speaking country, but I'm forced to see documents in Spanish every time I do something official because of the 0.5% of the population speaks Spanish that's being dramatically increased by these politicians seeking to destroy society. The secret to America's success, there's a lot of secrets, but one of the biggest secrets is that people came here because they wanted to be American. They wanted to be American. It's not an ethnicity. It's not a faith. It's not a religion. It's not skin color. It's a concept. It's something that people bought into. And increasingly, we're not seeing that happen today as people come here and leech off of our society instead of becoming part of our society. And that's a major problem. And that's been going on in the UK for the last 30 years.
Yeah, and that's the point that all I'm trying to make. Like you could say, well, I'm going there because of these opportunities. Yeah, but again, you're failing to understand that those opportunities may not exist when your kids go older.
Yeah.
And when those opportunities no longer exist, and you look at them and you're like, I don't recognize my own kids because they went through a different schooling system, they went through a different educational system. How do you now engage with your kids? And that creates a degree of cultural alienation between you and your family. Do you really want to live through that experience? Because at that point in time, your economics really won't make a difference, right? I mean, as we all know.
No, I agree with you, but I, you know, I'm not in that person's circumstance. I don't know, but I think somebody made a point earlier I was going to make. You should have moved to Wyoming or Montana if you wanted border myces, but you need to know about the place you're going to. I mean, if I'm going to move to Chile and I want border myces, I'm going to live in Patagonia, you know, in Argentina. That's what I'm going to do. But at some point, you can't let the parents off the hook entirely. I mean, you have to be engaged with your kids constantly, daily, talk to them about school, what's going on, and when you become aware of the nonsense that they're involved in, then you remove them from that school and you put them elsewhere. I'm not attacking him, I'm not blaming him, but I'm just saying that if you want culture to exist, you can inculcate it. And I'll give you two examples before we wrap up. There are two groups of people that stand out here head and shoulders above everyone else who have retained their unique cultural identity for centuries in America, yet are participating Americans who are part of our system. And those two groups, Nick just gave a membership and Stephen Prinsloo benefited from it. Thank you, Stephen. Let me salute you real quick. So those two groups are the old Spanish of San Antonio, Southern Texas, New Mexico. Those Spanish families have been here since before there was an America, before there was a United States. And they became part of America, became Americans, adopted our values and norms, but they still speak Spanish centuries later. They're still Roman Catholics. They still practice cotillion. They still have unique things that made them Spanish in Mexico at the time and what became America. And they're Americans through and through, but they have that unique cultural identity. And the other group that stands out is the Amish. The Amish came here in the 17th and 18th century to avoid religious persecution in Switzerland and southwestern Germany. They came here, the Amish and Mennonites. They settled in Pennsylvania. And in 1900, there were 5,000 Amish in North America. Today, it's almost 800, 900,000 Amish. And that's not because of immigration. That's because they're knocking boots with each other. They don't accept people in their group readily because they're very strict religiously, and it's not a cup of tea that most people want. But the Amish still speak German, 17th century German, so I have to listen carefully when I speak to them. But they still speak German. They still practice their faith. They still are eschew the modern conveniences. The Mennonites have adopted many of those things, but they still have their conservative dress. They still behave in the same fashion. They have retained their unique cultural identity. And that's a responsibility of parents to inculcate those values into their children if they want it to persist. And if they don't, then it dies off. Most Germans, when they migrate around the world, they lose their Germanness within 2 or 3 generations. Look at all the Germans in Latin America. You know, they're not German anymore. They don't have, you know, first name is Adolfo. You know, that's not German. Adolf is German. And you see that in America. Most Americans of German heritage have German surnames and know nothing about their German heritage because after 3 generations, gone. But the Amish and the Old Spanish, centuries later, they retain that because it was important enough to them that they inculcate their children. And that's why I say parents have a role. But anyway, I'm not attacking him. I'm just saying that I feel for him because it's sad. It's really sad.
Yeah, and I'm also saying the same. Like, I understand, and I want to make this very clear. I understand that when people choose to immigrate, I understand the reason for it, and I understand why they may feel that way. But what I'm trying to say is that sometimes the reason or the rationality appears to be shallow because, as you very rightly said, if you're going to somewhere, you should know what it's about. And we talked about an hour ago about people having zero idea what's going on abroad. We said about all these different things that go on, and you're like, actually, you know what, like these things are occurring there. And what you find is that in a lot of instances, people go to those cultures knowing very little about them. They go there with this idea that nothing exists in South Africa, this idealized version of what they think is going to exist there, and inevitably it isn't the actual outcome that they experience. And so the point that I was making is that you do find, and I do find this weird with South Africans, is that rather than be respectful for who they are and where they came from, they're always looking for, like, where can I go that life is going to be easier? But then when they look at that place of where's that life going to be easier, they spend like zero time or attention to actually trying to find out, like, where is this place I'm going to call my home? Where is this place that I'm supposedly giving up my whole cultural identity for? And then they're assuming that cultural identity that they take on is never going to change. And then when it changes, they're like, oh, what happened? Like, it's not that straightforward. And that's why I come back to the point. I just find it weird, man, that South Africans, whenever you have this conversation with them, they'll shut you down. They'll be like, lots of whataboutisms. They don't really know anything about what's going on outside of it. There's this false assumption that things are going to happen. And I don't find that with people like yourself, Americans. I don't hear Americans saying to me every day, I'm immigrating. I don't hear the British. I don't hear it with the Australians, the Japanese, the French. I just don't hear it. But in South Africa, it's just the norm. And it's just weird. That's my comment. It's just weird.
It's definitely strange. Folks, it's been a whirlwind 2-hour tour here, and we probably go for hours more here. It's a hazard, but we can give you all a break there. Some of you need to get more data probably to cover the rest of the stream. But thanks a lot for tuning in, and I want to thank my guests tonight. And if we go forward and we do this again, he won't be a guest. He'll be a co-host if he wants to do it. Byron Shepherd from Morning Shot. This was all about giving people a chance to learn a little bit more about Byron, and I think they definitely did. I mean, I didn't know that you were a pugilist or a fighter there. That was interesting to discover. So maybe I won't give you a hard time in person next time I see you.
Once upon a time.
Yeah, but those skills aren't completely gone. Besides, I'm crippled right now, courtesy of Delta Airlines. I really couldn't strike back if we got in a fight. Maybe when I recover. But thanks for the super chats that came early. They seem to dry up. But once again, I challenge you. Your credit's terrible. Prove it's not bad. Super chat. No, seriously. But thanks a lot. Byron, any last thoughts before we wrap up here? A lot of people seem to really enjoy this broadcast.
Yeah, thanks for everybody that stuck through for the whole 2 hours. 2 hours really flew by, and thanks for having me on the show.
No, it's my pleasure. And thanks for the handful of people became subscribers. We're now 59 away from 10,000, a place that we reached in just about 4 months or 3.5 months a couple years ago before shadow banning. But now on the new channel, it's taken 23 months. But thank you all for that. But we know those numbers aren't real. There's far more people watching than what YouTube is telling me. I see my data being screwed with this whole broadcast here. And instead of showing the broadcast, they're showing me how many people in my channel since 5 o'clock this morning. That's not normal. So that's YouTube doing their things. Anyway, folks, thanks a lot. We appreciate you being here. And there probably won't be night owls because this went longer than I expected, but I might do a night owls later on if there's news breaking. But take a look. The EFF is out threatening people right now with violence and looting if they don't shut down their businesses on the 20th March. We will see what happens on the 20th March as the African National Congress and its government tolerate this lawlessness. Anyway, Byron, thank you very much. Oh, there's another super chat from Nicholas Groves coming up. Let me go ahead and ring the bell before it gets there. By the way, Byron, this is a genuine Bavarian cowbell.
I saw that. Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah, thanks. I picked that up in the Alps when I was there. But anyway, all right, that's it. We're going to wrap it up there, folks. Thank you so much, Byron. Appreciate it. We'll catch you here next time. I'm going to go ahead and put us on mute and do the closeout graphics here in just a second. So I'll let you, can you drop off there? And then I'll just close up. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Take it easy. Cheers.
All right, folks, Byron Shepherd from Morning Shot. That was epic. I really enjoyed that. I hope you liked that conversation. I really enjoyed it. A long one, a lot longer than I intended to go. So thanks for being here, folks. And we'll catch you. I might do a night owls, no promise. It's 1 o'clock Eastern Standard, 8 o'clock South African time. I need to run a few errands. If I have time, I'll do a night owls. So thank you all so much. If you're not a subscriber, please become one. Doesn't cost you anything but a moment of your time. And once again, thanks to my guest, Byron Shepherd from Morning Shot. And we'll see if we go forward and do something together in the future. It would be a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Cheers. Ooh, what happened there? That's not right. Where's my rugby background? There we go. That's what's supposed to be happening. That was a little bit embarrassing. Amateur hour there. Thanks a lot.